They buried an empty coffin with her name on it. They told her husband she was dead. And when the wagon train rolled west, Clara Wynne woke alone in the Arizona desert, abandoned, betrayed, left to die under a merciless sun. But fate had other plans. A lone rider appeared on the horizon, a man who lived by one unbreakable code. I don't leave people behind, not ever. What happens next will break your heart and restore your faith in humanity. Stay with me until the very end of this story, and comment below with the city you're watching from so I can see just how far Clara's journey has traveled across this world. The fever came like a thief in the night. Clara Wynne remembered the exact moment it seized her, 3 days east of Kingman, when the wagon train had stopped to water the horses at a muddy creek that barely deserved the name. She had been helping Martha Henderson hang wet linens on a rope strung between two wagons when the world suddenly tilted sideways. The sky traded places with the earth. Colors bled into sounds. And then there was nothing but darkness, hot and suffocating, pressing down on her chest like a stone. She remembered fragments after that, voices swimming through the black, the rough canvas of the wagon cover above her swaying with every bump in the trail. Someone pressing a wet cloth to her forehead, her husband Thomas's voice, distant and strange, saying words she couldn't quite catch. And then, nothing. Nothing at all. Until now. Clara's eyes opened to a sky so blue it hurt. For a long moment she simply stared at it, trying to remember who she was, where she was, why her throat felt like she had swallowed a handful of desert sand. Her lips were cracked. Her skin burned. Every muscle in her body screamed with the particular agony of prolonged stillness. She turned her head, slowly, because even that small movement sent waves of dizziness crashing through her, and saw nothing but empty desert stretching to the horizon. Red rock formations jutted from the earth like broken teeth. Saguaro cacti stood sentinel in the distance, their arms raised as if in surrender to the brutal sun. No wagons, no horses, no people. Clara pushed herself up on trembling arms, her heart beginning to pound with the first cold fingers of fear. Her dress was stained with sweat and dust, torn at the hem. Someone had left a canteen beside her, half empty when she shook it, and a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "Thomas?" Her voice came out as a croak, barely human. "Thomas!" The desert swallowed her cry without an echo. She was alone, completely, terrifyingly alone. Clara staggered to her feet, swaying like a drunk as the blood rushed from her head. The world spun, steadied, spun again. She grabbed onto a nearby rock formation to keep from falling, her fingernails scraping against the rough surface until they bled. "Think," she commanded herself. "Think, Clara. What happened? Where is everyone?" The wagon train. They had been traveling with the Morrison Company, 47 souls bound for California, chasing promises of gold and fertile land and new beginnings. Thomas had spent their entire savings on the journey, convinced that their future lay in the West. Clara had followed because that's what wives did. They followed. They trusted. They believed their husbands would keep them safe. But the wagons were gone. The people were gone. Thomas was gone. And she was here, alone, with half a canteen of water and a bundle that, when she unwrapped it with shaking hands, contained nothing but a few strips of dried beef and a folded piece of paper. Clara stared at the paper for a long moment before finding the courage to open it. The handwriting was unfamiliar, not Thomas's cramped, careful script, but something looser, more feminine. "Mrs. Wynne, God forgive us for what we've done. Your husband said you passed in the night, said there was no saving you and we needed to move on before the fever spread. We buried what we thought was your body at dawn, but Martha saw you breathing when they carried you out. She told Mr. Morrison, but he said we couldn't wait. Said the living had to come before the dead. I'm leaving this in case you wake. There's a town called Kingman, about 20 miles northwest. Follow the sun in the morning, keep it at your back in the evening. God be with you. Sarah Cooper." Clara read the letter 3 times before the words fully registered. Your husband said you passed in the night. We buried what we thought was your body. They had left her. Thomas had told them she was dead, and they had buried an empty coffin, and they had left her here to die alone in the desert while they continued their precious journey west. The letter fell from her fingers. Clara sank to her knees in the red dirt, a sound escaping her throat that was half sob, half scream. It echoed off the rock formations and scattered a group of vultures that had been circling overhead, drawn, she realized, with sick horror by the scent of what they thought would soon be carrion. Her. They had been circling her. "No," Clara whispered. Then louder. "No, no, 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 no!" She screamed until her voice gave out, until her throat was raw and her eyes burned with tears that her dehydrated body could barely produce. She screamed at the empty desert, at the uncaring sky, at the God who had allowed this to happen. She screamed at Thomas, who had promised to love and protect her, who had sworn before witnesses and the Almighty that he would cherish her until death parted them. He had parted them himself. He had looked at his sick wife and decided she was too much trouble to save. He had told everyone she was dead, buried a box of rocks or blankets or nothing at all, and walked away without looking back. The betrayal was so enormous, so incomprehensible, that Clara couldn't even begin to process it. It sat in her chest like a physical weight, making it hard to breathe, hard to think, hard to do anything but kneel in the dirt and weep. But the sun was relentless. It beat down on her exposed skin, leaching moisture from her body with every passing minute. And somewhere, buried beneath the grief and rage and disbelief, a small voice spoke up. The voice of the girl who had survived a childhood of poverty in Boston, who had worked 16-hour days in the textile mills, who had buried both parents before her 18th birthday and kept going anyway. "Get up," that voice said. "Get up, Clara. You're not dead yet." She lifted her head, wiped her face with the back of her hand, looked at the canteen, the dried beef, the vast and terrible desert that surrounded her. 20 miles to Kingman. That's what the letter said. 20 miles through terrain that would kill her if she made a single wrong decision, but staying here would kill her faster. Clara Wynne rose to her feet. She picked up the canteen, the food, the letter that was both her salvation and her damnation. She looked at the position of the sun, trying to remember which way was northwest, and she started walking. Up. The first mile was the hardest. Clara's legs felt like they belonged to someone else, weak, uncoordinated, threatening to buckle with every step. The fever had drained her of strength she hadn't known she possessed. Her head pounded, her vision blurred. Twice she fell, scraping her palms on the rocky ground, and twice she forced herself back up again. "Keep moving," she told herself. "Just keep moving." The desert was beautiful in a brutal sort of way. The red rocks glowed in the afternoon sun, their surfaces carved by wind and time into fantastic shapes, arches and spires and bridges that looked like the work of some giant sculptor. Wildflowers bloomed in unexpected patches of color: yellow brittle bush, purple sage, the vivid red of Indian paintbrush. Lizards darted across her path, and once she saw a roadrunner sprinting through the scrub, its crest raised like a flag. But beauty couldn't quench her thirst. Beauty couldn't fill her empty stomach. Beauty couldn't bring back the husband who had abandoned her or the life she had thought she was building. Clara rationed her water carefully, one small sip every hour, no matter how desperately her body craved more. She ate the dried beef in tiny pieces, letting each one soften in her mouth before swallowing. She walked until the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and deep, bruised purple. Then she found a shallow overhang in the rocks, crawled beneath it, and let exhaustion drag her down into dreamless sleep. The second day was worse. Clara woke before dawn, her body stiff and aching, her throat so dry she couldn't swallow. The canteen was down to its last few mouthfuls. The dried beef was gone, and when she tried to stand, her legs refused to cooperate. For a long moment, she simply lay there, staring at the lightening sky, wondering if this was where her story would end. Alone in the desert, 20-something miles from nowhere, killed not by Indians or outlaws or any of the dangers Thomas had warned her about, but by her own husband's indifference. It would be easy to give up. So easy. Just close her eyes and let the sun finish what the fever had started. "Is that what you want?" the voice inside her asked. "To die because some man decided you weren't worth saving?" No. No, damn it, that was not how Clara Wynne was going to die. She forced herself upright, ignoring the protests of her battered body. She took her last sip of water, feeling it slide down her parched throat like liquid gold. She checked the sun's position, still early enough that she could make some distance before the worst heat of the day, and started walking again. The landscape changed as she traveled. The red rocks gave way to flatter terrain dotted with creosote bushes and cholla cactus. The mountains in the distance never seemed to get any closer, no matter how far she walked. Twice she saw what looked like water shimmering on the horizon, and twice she learned firsthand why they called it a mirage. By midday, Clara could barely put one foot in front of the other. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. Her skin was burned raw. The world had taken on a strange, dreamlike quality, colors too bright and sounds too distant. She wasn't sure anymore if she was walking toward Kingman or in circles. She wasn't sure of anything except the sun pressing down on her like a physical weight, and the dust coating her tongue, and the absolute, overwhelming desire to simply stop. She found a scraggly mesquite tree, barely more than a large bush, really, and collapsed in its meager shade. The ground was hot even here, radiating the heat it had absorbed from the sun. Clara curled into herself, drawing her knees to her chest, and closed her eyes. "I'm sorry," she thought. She wasn't sure who she was apologizing to. Her parents, maybe, who had worked so hard to give her a better life. The children she would never have, the future she would never see. "I tried. I really tried." Clara dreamed of water. Not mirages this time, but real water. A clear, cold stream running over smooth stones, surrounded by green grass and shady trees. She knelt beside it and drank until her stomach ached with the sweetness of it. And when she looked up, there was a man standing on the opposite bank. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing clothes that had seen hard use, a battered hat, a leather vest, boots caked with dust. His face was weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes were kind. He looked at her with something like recognition, though she was certain she had never seen him before. "You're not done yet," he said. Clara opened her mouth to respond, but the dream was already dissolving, fragmenting into light and heat and the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Hoofbeats. Her eyes snapped open. For a moment she thought she was still dreaming. The figure on horseback seemed to shimmer in the heat waves rising from the desert floor, more mirage than man. But mirages didn't make sounds, and she could hear the horses breathing, could hear the creak of leather and the jingle of metal. Clara tried to call out, but her voice was gone. All that emerged was a thin, rasping wheeze. She raised one hand instead, just a few inches, all she could manage, and prayed that whoever was out there would see her. The rider turned his horse in her direction. Time seemed to slow as he approached. Clara watched through half-closed eyes, too exhausted to feel hope, too stubborn to feel despair. The horse was a tall gray, well-muscled and alert. The rider wore a broad-brimmed hat that shadowed his face, but she could see the rifle slung across his back, the pistol at his hip, the careful way he scanned the terrain as he rode. He stopped a few feet from the mesquite tree and dismounted with the easy grace of someone who had spent most of his life on horseback. When he crouched beside her, Clara saw his face clearly for the first time. Sun-darkened skin, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, eyes the color of whiskey held up to firelight. It was the man from her dream. "Ma'am?" His voice was low, concerned. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Clara tried to speak, failed, tried again. "Water." The mit, real, solid, not a mirage or a fever dream, reached for the canteen at his side. He lifted her head with surprising gentleness and pressed the opening to her cracked lips. "Slow," he said. "Small sips. Too much too fast will make you sick." The water was warm and slightly metallic, and it was the most wonderful thing Clara had ever tasted. She wanted to grab the canteen and drain it, but the stranger controlled the flow, giving her just enough to wet her throat before pulling it away. "More," she croaked. "In a minute. Let that settle first." He studied her face, his expression unreadable. "What's your name?" "Clara. Clara Wynne." "Clara." He said it like he was committing it to memory. "I'm Cole Madron, Army Scout out of Fort Whipple. Can you tell me what happened to you?" Clara closed her eyes. The water had cleared some of the fog from her mind, but it had also brought the memories rushing back. The fever, the wagon train, Thomas's betrayal. She felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. and hated herself for the weakness. "They left me," she whispered. "The wagon train. My husband told them I was dead. They buried an empty coffin and left me." She heard Cole's sharp intake of breath, felt his hand tighten briefly on her shoulder. "How long ago?" "2 days, maybe 3. I lost track." "And you've been walking since then, alone?" Clara nodded. Cole Madron was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had a hard edge to it that hadn't been there before. "Your husband. He knew you were alive when he told them you were dead?" "I don't know." The admission hurt more than Clara expected. "I was unconscious, fevered, but someone saw me breathing. They left a note, said Martha Henderson saw me breathing, but they couldn't wait." Jesus Christ. The profanity was soft, almost reverent, and it captured perfectly the magnitude of what had been done to her. Clara opened her eyes to find Cole staring at the horizon, his jaw clenched tight. "There's fresh, disturbed ground about a mile east of here," he said. "Saw it when I was riding in. Looked like a grave." "My grave," Clara said. "They buried an empty coffin with my name on it." Cole turned back to her. His whiskey-colored eyes held something fierce, anger maybe, or something deeper. "I've been scouting these territories for 8 years," he said. "Seen men do terrible things. Seen whole families wiped out by disease, disaster, each other, but I've never—" He stopped, shook his head. "I've never heard of a man leaving his living wife in the desert to die." Maybe he thought I really was dying. Maybe he didn't want to watch. Clara wasn't sure why she was defending Thomas. Habit, perhaps. Years of smoothing over his mistakes, explaining away his shortcomings, pretending that the man she had married was better than he actually was. "Does it matter what he thought?" Cole's voice was gentle but firm. "You're alive. He left you. Those are the only facts that count." He offered her the canteen again, and this time Clara drank more deeply, feeling the water spread through her body like a slow-moving blessing. "Can you ride?" Cole asked. "I don't know. We're about 15 miles from Kingman. I can make a travois, drag you behind the horse, but it'll be rough going and slow. If you can sit in the saddle, we can be there by nightfall." Clara looked at the gray horse standing patient and calm a few feet away. The thought of climbing onto its back seemed impossible. Her arms couldn't even support her weight on the ground. But the thought of spending another night in the desert, another day under the merciless sun, was worse. "Help me up," she said. Cole Madron didn't argue. He simply slid one arm under her knees, the other behind her back, and lifted her as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. Clara gasped at the sudden movement, clutching at his shirt for balance. "Sorry," he said. "Should have warned you." "It's fine. I'm fine." She wasn't fine. She was about as far from fine as a person could be. But Cole didn't call her on the lie. He carried her to the horse, somehow managing to mount with her still in his arms, settling her sideways in front of him so that her head rested against his chest. "Lean on me if you need to," he said. "It's a long ride." Clara wanted to protest that she could support herself, that she wasn't some helpless damsel who needed a man to carry her, but her body had other ideas. The moment the horse started moving, what little strength she had remaining simply evaporated. She sagged against Cole's solid warmth, felt his arm tighten around her waist, and let herself rest. For the first time in days, she didn't have to fight alone. They rode in silence for a long while. The desert scrolled past in shades of brown and red and dusty green, broken occasionally by the stark white of sun-bleached bones or the dark smudge of a distant bird. The horse's hooves kept up a steady rhythm, hypnotic in its regularity. Clara drifted in and out of consciousness, her fevered mind struggling to process everything that had happened. Sometimes she was aware of Cole's heartbeat beneath her ear, slow and steady. Sometimes she was back in the wagon, listening to Thomas talk about California, about the life they would build, about the children they would have. Sometimes she was in Boston, 12 years old again, watching her mother cough blood into a handkerchief and knowing that death was coming, that it always came, that no one could be trusted to stay. "Clara!" She jerked awake at the sound of her name. The light had changed, the sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the desert floor. "Sorry to wake you," Cole said, "but you need to drink more. And I have some hardtack. It's not much, but it'll keep your strength up." He handed her the canteen and Clara drank gratefully. The hardtack was exactly what he'd described. Not much, but her shrunken stomach couldn't have handled anything more substantial anyway. "How do you feel?" Cole asked. "Like I've been dragged behind a horse for 50 miles. A brief smile crossed his weathered face. "Fair enough, but you're talking in complete sentences now, which is an improvement." Clara shifted slightly, trying to find a more comfortable position. Cole's arm adjusted automatically to accommodate her movement. "You said you're an army scout," she said. "What are you doing out here alone?" "Tracking. There's been some trouble with rustlers hitting ranches east of Kingman. I've been trying to find their camp." "Did you find it?" "Not yet, but I found you instead, so I'd say the day wasn't wasted." Clara didn't know how to respond to that. In her experience, people didn't go out of their way for strangers, not without expecting something in return. Thomas had taught her that lesson well. He had seemed so kind, so attentive during their courtship. It wasn't until after the wedding that she learned his kindness was transactional, his attention conditional on her usefulness. "You could have ridden past," she said quietly. "Left me there. No one would have known." Cole was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had that hard edge again. "I don't leave people behind. Not ever." "Why not?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. He shifted in the saddle, and Clara felt the tension in his body, muscles coiling tight beneath the surface. "Because I know what it's like," he said finally, "to be left, to be forgotten, to have someone decide you're not worth saving." Clara looked up at him, but his eyes were fixed on the horizon, his face carefully blank. "What happened?" "That's a story for another time. Let's just say I made myself a promise a long time ago. I don't leave behind anyone who can be saved." Clara thought about that as the horse carried them west. She thought about all the people who had left her over the years, her father to consumption, her mother to the same, her brothers to accidents and disease, her husband to cowardice and cruelty. She had spent her entire life being left behind, being forgotten, being told through action, if not words, that she wasn't worth the trouble of keeping. And now here was this stranger, this army scout with whiskey eyes and a battered hat, who had looked at her dying in the desert and decided she mattered. She wasn't sure if she believed him, but she wanted to. God, how she wanted to. The sun was setting by the time Kingman came into view, a small collection of buildings clustered around a railroad depot, looking fragile and improbable against the vast, empty landscape. To Clara's exhausted eyes, it might as well have been paradise. "Almost there," Cole said. "There's a boarding house on the main street. Mrs. Henderson runs it. She's good people. She'll take care of you until you're back on your feet." Henderson. The name sent a jolt through Clara's memory. "Martha Henderson," she said. "The woman who saw me breathing. Is she—" "Different Henderson. Common name out here." Cole paused. "But we can try to find out where your wagon train went if you want. Send word ahead. There might be people who could—" "No." The word came out sharper than Clara intended. She felt Cole tense behind her. "No," she repeated, softer this time. I don't want to find them. I don't want Thomas to know I survived. I don't want any of them to know." "Clara, if your husband thinks you're dead, then let him think it." She was surprised by the bitterness in her own voice. "Let him live with what he did. Let him spend the rest of his miserable life believing he left his wife to die in the desert. I don't want him back. I don't want his apologies or his excuses or his lies. I want to be done with him. I want to be done with all of it." Cole was quiet for a long moment. Then, "All right, your choice to make, not mine." His easy acceptance startled her. Thomas had never accepted her choices, had always argued, always pushed, always found ways to make her feel foolish for wanting anything other than what he wanted. But Cole just nodded, adjusted his grip on the reins, and guided the horse toward town. Kingman at dusk was a symphony of noise and movement. Miners heading to the saloons after a long day's work, shopkeepers locking up their stores, women calling children home for dinner. A stagecoach rumbled past, kicking up a cloud of dust that made Clara cough. Cole navigated through it all, with the confidence of someone who knew every street, every building, every face. People called out greetings as he passed. "Hey, Madron! Good to see you, Cole!" "Who you got there?" And he responded with nods and brief waves, never slowing down. The boarding house was a two-story wooden structure with a wide front porch and flower boxes in the windows. A hand-painted sign read Henderson House in cheerful red letters. As Cole dismounted, carefully, keeping one hand on Clara to prevent her from falling, the front door opened and a woman stepped out. She was perhaps 50, gray-haired and solid-bodied, with a face that looked like it had weathered its share of storms. Her eyes went wide when she saw Clara. "Lord have mercy. Cole Madron, what have you brought me?" "Found her in the desert, Mrs. Henderson, about 15 miles east. She's been out there 2, maybe 3 days." 2 days? In this heat? Mrs. Henderson was already moving, her capable hands reaching for Clara. "Get her inside. The blue room, 2nd floor. I'll put water on for a bath and—" "I can walk," Clara interrupted weakly. Both Cole and Mrs. Henderson looked at her like she had announced her intention to fly. "Honey," Mrs. Henderson said, not unkindly, "you can barely keep your eyes open. Let us help you." Clara wanted to argue. She had been taking care of herself for as long as she could remember, but when Cole lifted her from the horse again, she found she didn't have the strength to protest. She let him carry her up the porch steps, through the neat parlor, up the narrow staircase to a small room with blue-flowered wallpaper and a bed that looked softer than anything she had ever seen. "I'll send Mary up with broth and bread," Mrs. Henderson said, bustling around the room, opening windows to let in the cooling evening air. "Don't you try to eat too much at first. Your stomach won't handle it. And I'll heat water for a bath. Get that dust off you." "Thank you," Clara whispered. I don't have any money. I can't pay—" "Hush." Mrs. Henderson's voice was firm but gentle. "You think I'm going to turn away a woman half dead from the desert? We'll figure out the money later. Right now, you rest." She swept out of the room, leaving Clara alone with Cole. He stood by the door, hat in hand, looking oddly uncertain for a man who had seemed so confident on horseback. "I should go," he said. "Let you sleep, but I'll check on you tomorrow, if that's all right." "Why?" The question seemed to puzzle him. "Why what?" "Why check on me? You brought me to town. You did your good deed. You don't owe me anything else." Cole Madron looked at her for a long moment. Then he crossed the room to where she lay on the bed and crouched down so that his eyes were level with hers. "I told you," he said quietly. "I don't leave people behind. And right now, you're still lost, even if you're not in the desert anymore. So I'll keep checking until you're found." He reached out and, very gently, brushed a strand of hair from her face. The touch was light, almost impersonal, but it sent a shiver down Clara's spine that had nothing to do with fever. "Get some sleep, Clara Wynne. Tomorrow's a new day." He was gone before she could think of a response. Clara slept for 14 hours straight. When she finally woke, the sun was high and the blue room was filled with warm, golden light. Someone had drawn a bath for her at some point. She had a vague memory of Mrs. Henderson helping her into the water, washing the desert from her hair and skin, and dressed her in a clean white nightgown that smelled like lavender. For a long moment, she simply lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to reconcile her memories with her current reality. 3 days ago, she had been dying in the desert, abandoned by the man who had promised to love her forever. Now she was clean, warm, safe, lying in a soft bed in a strange town, surrounded by people who had shown her more kindness in 12 hours than Thomas had shown her in 3 years of marriage. It didn't seem real. It didn't seem possible. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," Clara called, pushing herself up against the pillows. Mrs. Henderson entered carrying a tray laden with food, eggs, toast, sliced peaches, a pot of tea. The smell alone was enough to make Clara's stomach growl embarrassingly loud. "Thought I heard you stirring." Mrs. Henderson set the tray on the bedside table and fixed Clara with a critical eye. "You look better. Color's coming back to your cheeks." "I feel better. Thank you for everything." "Don't mention it." Mrs. Henderson poured the tea, added a generous spoonful of honey. "Cole told me what happened. About the wagon train. About your husband." Clara's throat tightened. "He shouldn't have. He didn't tell me much. Just enough that I'd understand why you might not want to be found." Mrs. Henderson handed her the teacup, her expression softening. I've been running this boarding house for 20 years, Mrs. Wynne. I've seen women arrive in all kinds of circumstances. I don't judge, and I don't gossip. Your secrets are safe with me." "I'm not sure I have any secrets," Clara said. "I'm not sure I have anything at all." "You have your life. That's more than most would have, after 3 days in the desert with no water." Mrs. Henderson gestured to the food. "Eat, slowly, and when you're feeling up to it, come downstairs. We'll figure out what comes next." She left without waiting for a response. Clara ate mechanically, barely tasting the food. Her mind was racing, trying to process everything that had happened, everything that would need to happen. She had no money, no possessions beyond the ruined dress she had been wearing. She had no family, no friends, no one to turn to. She was, for all practical purposes, dead, a woman who had been buried in the desert and left to rot. But she wasn't rotting, she was alive. And as long as she was alive, she could rebuild. The question was, rebuild what? Clara was still pondering that question when another knock came at the door. "Mrs. Wynne?" A young woman's voice, hesitant and high. "Mr. Madron is downstairs. He's asking if you're well enough for visitors." Clara's heart did something strange at the mention of Cole's name. A little skip that she firmly attributed to residual fever. Tell him I'll be down in 10 minutes. She found a simple dress hanging in the wardrobe, Mrs. Henderson's doing, no doubt, and dressed herself with hands that only trembled slightly. The face that looked back at her from the small mirror was gaunt, sunburned, hollow-eyed. She hardly recognized herself. Good, she thought fiercely. Clara Wynne is dead. This is someone new. Cole was waiting in the parlor, hat in hand, looking freshly shaved and uncomfortable in a way that struck Clara as oddly endearing. He rose when she entered, and for a moment they simply looked at each other. The scout and the ghost, the rescuer and the rescued. "You look better," he said finally. "I feel like I've been trampled by a herd of cattle, but thank you for the politeness." A brief smile crossed his face. "Honest would have worked too. You look like hell, but less like death, which is an improvement." Clara laughed. An actual laugh, rusty from disuse, but genuine. It surprised her almost as much as it seemed to surprise him. "I came to see if you needed anything," Cole continued, serious again. "Supplies, money to tide you over, a letter sent somewhere." "I don't have anywhere to send a letter, or anyone to send it to." "What about family? Friends back east?" "My parents are dead. My brothers are dead. I have some cousins in Boston, but we haven't spoken in years." Clara sat down on one of Mrs. Henderson's overstuffed chairs, suddenly exhausted despite her long sleep. "Thomas was my family. The wagon train was supposed to be my new beginning, and now you get to choose your own beginning." Clara looked up at him sharply. "What do you mean?" Cole sat down across from her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "The way I see it, you have two options. One, you can try to catch up to your husband, confront him, demand answers, maybe get your possessions back. Two, you can let Clara Wynne stay buried in that desert and become someone new. Someone who doesn't owe anything to anyone. Someone who can build whatever life she wants." "You make it sound simple." "Simple doesn't mean easy. I never said it would be easy." Clara was quiet for a moment, turning his words over in her mind. The old Clara, the Clara who had followed Thomas across the country because that's what wives did, would have chosen option one. Would have chased after the man who wronged her, demanded justice, demanded acknowledgement of her suffering. But the old Clara had also trusted a man who left her to die. The old Clara had made herself small to fit into someone else's plans. The old Clara had been so afraid of being alone that she had accepted treatment no person should accept. The Clara was dead now, buried in an unmarked grave in the Arizona desert. "Option two," she said. "I want option two." Cole nodded slowly, something like approval in his whiskey eyes. "Then we should probably start with getting you a job. Mrs. Henderson might need help around the boarding house, but it won't pay much. There's a general store on Main Street that's always looking for clerks." "Wait." Clara held up a hand. "Why are you doing this? You saved my life, which is more than anyone else has ever done. But why are you still here? Why are you helping me plan my future?" Cole was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough around the edges. Because I've been where you are. Lost. Broken. Convinced that no one in the world gave a damn whether I lived or died. And someone helped me then. Helped me when they didn't have to, when it would have been easier to just ride on by. I swore I'd pay that forward someday. He met her eyes. Today, you're my someday. Clara didn't know what to say. She had spent so long believing that kindness was transactional, that people only helped when they expected something in return, that genuine generosity left her speechless. I don't know how to repay you, she managed finally. You don't repay it to me. Someday, when you're strong again, you find someone else who needs help and you give it to them. That's how it works. That's how we keep the world from becoming nothing but people leaving people behind. He stood, settling his hat back on his head. I've got to get back to Fort Whipple, report on those rustlers, pick up my next assignment, but I'll be in town again in a few weeks. If you need anything before then, Mrs. Henderson knows how to reach me. Cole. He paused at the door. Thank you, Clara said, for seeing me, for stopping, for everything. Cole Madron looked at her with those whiskey eyes, and for just a moment, Clara saw something there that made her breath catch, something deep and warm and dangerous. I'll always stop for you, Clara Wynne, he said quietly. Don't forget that. And then he was gone, his boots echoing on the porch steps, leaving Clara alone with Mrs. Henderson's doilies and flower arrangements, and the strange, unfamiliar feeling of hope rising in her chest. She was dead. She was buried. She was free. And for the first time in her adult life, the future felt like something to anticipate rather than endure. The weeks that followed were the hardest of Clara's life, and also, paradoxically, the best. She took the job at the general store, starting behind the counter and eventually working her way up to managing inventory and ordering supplies. The work was exhausting, especially for a body still recovering from fever and exposure, but Clara threw herself into it with a determination that surprised even her. She had something to prove now, not to Thomas, not to the people who had left her behind, but to herself. Mrs. Henderson became something like a mother to her, scolding her when she worked too hard, feeding her extra portions at dinner, sitting up late to share stories about her own life. The husband she had lost to the war, the children she had buried before they could grow, the way she had rebuilt herself piece by piece in this rough frontier town. We're survivors, you and me, Mrs. Henderson said one evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun go down. That's what women are when you get right down to it. Survivors. I don't feel like a survivor, Clara admitted. I feel like I'm just pretending, going through the motions until someone figures out I have no idea what I'm doing. Honey, that's what everyone feels like. The trick is to keep pretending until it becomes real. Clara thought about that a lot in the days that followed. She thought about the woman she had been, quiet, obedient, always disappearing herself to make room for Thomas's needs and wants and moods. And she thought about the woman she wanted to become. Someone strong, someone capable, someone who didn't need a man to tell her she was worth something. The transformation was slow. There were setbacks, nights when she woke gasping from nightmares about the desert, days when grief and rage overwhelmed her so completely that she could barely function. But there were victories too. The first time she handled a difficult customer without trembling. The first time she walked to the edge of town and looked out at the desert without feeling fear. The first time she caught herself laughing at something and realized, with shock, that she was happy. Actually happy. Not pretending, not performing, but genuinely, honestly happy. And always in the back of her mind, there was Cole. He returned to Kingman 3 weeks after their first meeting, dusty and tired from the trail, but smiling when he walked into the general store and saw her behind the counter. Well, look at you, he said, going to put Wilson out of business at this rate. Mr. Wilson is a perfectly competent businessman. He doesn't need help from me. Mr. Wilson is a drunk who can't count past 20 without taking off his boots. You're the only reason this place hasn't gone under. Clara tried to look stern, but a smile kept threatening to break through. Did you come here to insult my employer, or did you have actual business? Both. Cole leaned against the counter, close enough that Clara could smell the sage and horse leather that seemed to follow him everywhere. I need supplies, coffee, salt, ammunition, and I wanted to see how you were getting on. I'm getting on fine. Fine. He raised an eyebrow. That's all I get? Fine. What do you want me to say? That I'm thriving? That I wake up every morning grateful to be alive? That every day I spend not dying in the desert feels like a gift? Something like that would be nice. Yeah, Clara sighed, the pretense of irritation dissolving. I'm doing well, she admitted. Better than I expected. Mrs. Henderson has been wonderful, and Mr. Wilson, despite his counting difficulties, has been fair. I have a roof over my head and food in my stomach and work that keeps me busy. It's more than I had a month ago. It's more than most people have, Cole agreed. But is it enough? The question caught her off guard. What do you mean? I mean... He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I've seen people survive terrible things and then spend the rest of their lives just surviving, never living, just getting through each day until the days run out. I'd hate to see that happen to you. What's the alternative? I don't have money for grand adventures. I don't have family to return to. This is my life now. Work, sleep, work again. It's not exciting, but it's honest. It's safe, Cole countered. And there's nothing wrong with safe if that's what you choose. But I remember the woman I found in that desert, the one who walked 20 miles on fever and willpower, who refused to give up even when giving up would have been easier. That woman wasn't built for safe. That woman was built for more. Claire didn't know how to respond. She busied herself with arranging items on a shelf, not looking at him. I should get your supplies, she said finally. Clara. His hand caught her wrist. Gently, barely a touch, but enough to stop her in her tracks. She looked up to find his face inches from hers, those whiskey eyes searching her expression for something she couldn't name. I'm not trying to tell you what to do, he said quietly. Your life is your own. I see something in you, something that shouldn't be buried behind a counter in a general store. And I don't want you to wake up 20 years from now wondering what might have happened if you'd let yourself want more. What if wanting more just leads to more disappointment? More people leaving? Then at least you'll know you tried. They stood there for a long moment, closer than was proper, the air between them thick with things unsaid. Clara was acutely aware of his fingers on her wrist, of his breath against her cheek, of the way her heart was pounding like she had just run a mile. Then the bell above the door jingled and a customer walked in, breaking the spell. Cole released her wrist and stepped back, his face smoothing into careful neutrality. I'll come by Mrs. Henderson's for dinner, he said, as if nothing had happened. We can talk more then. I'm not sure there's anything more to say. There's always more to say, Clara. The question is whether you're brave enough to say it. He tipped his hat to the entering customer and walked out, leaving Clara standing behind the counter with her heart racing and her mind spinning and the terrifying, exhilarating feeling that everything was about to change. But he came for dinner that night, and the night after that, and the night after that. Mrs. Henderson watched them with knowing eyes but said nothing, simply setting an extra place at the table and making sure there was always enough pie. They talked for hours, about everything and nothing, about the past and the future, about dreams and fears and the small daily victories that made life worth living. Cole told her about his childhood in Texas, his years in the Army, the battles he had fought, and the friends he had lost. Clara told him about Boston, about the mills, about the slow erosion of her spirit that had led her to accept a marriage built on desperation rather than love. I thought I loved him, she said one evening as they sat on Mrs. Henderson's porch watching the stars come out. Thomas, I mean. When we first met, he was so charming, so attentive. He made me feel like I was the only woman in the world. I didn't realize until later that he made everyone feel that way. It was just what he did, how he got what he wanted. What changed? Everything, nothing. After the wedding, it was like a switch flipped. Suddenly, I wasn't a prize to be won. I was a possession to be managed. He decided what we ate, what we wore, who we saw. He controlled the money, the household, our entire lives. And when I tried to push back, he would become so cold, so distant, that I'd end up apologizing just to make the silence stop. That's not love, Cole said quietly. That's not even close. I know that now. But at the time I thought that was just how marriages worked. I thought I was the problem. That if I could just be better, try harder, want less, he would love me the way I needed to be loved. And instead he left you to die. Clara nodded, surprised to find that the words didn't hurt as much as they used to. Instead, he left me to die. And in some twisted way, that was the best thing he ever did for me, because it finally showed me who he really was. It finally set me free. Cole reached over and took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, warm against her skin. "For what it's worth," he said, "I'm glad he left you. Not because of what you suffered, that was unforgivable, but because it brought you here, because it gave you a second chance, because it let me find you." Clara looked at him, really looked the way she had been afraid to look since that first day in the desert. She saw the strength in his jaw, the kindness in his eyes, the steady presence that had become her anchor in the storm. "Why me?" she asked. "Of all the lost souls in the world, why did you ride back for me?" Cole was quiet for a moment, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "I almost didn't," he admitted. "When I saw you lying there under that tree, I thought you were dead, just another body in the desert, another tragedy in a land full of them. But something made me stop. Something made me look closer. And when I saw you were still breathing, still fighting, even when you had every reason to give up," he shook his head. "I couldn't leave you, couldn't ride away and pretend I hadn't seen, because I knew in my bones that you were supposed to survive, that your story wasn't over yet. And now?" Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "What do you think my story is supposed to be?" Cole turned to face her fully, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. "I think," he said slowly, "that your story is just beginning. And I hope, that maybe I could be part of it, if you'll let me." Clara's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. Every instinct she had, every fear, every doubt, every wound inflicted by years of disappointment screamed at her to pull back, to protect herself, to not trust this man who seemed too good to be true. But another voice, quieter but more insistent, reminded her of what he had said in the general store. "The question is whether you're brave enough." She had walked 20 miles through the desert on fever and willpower. She had survived abandonment, betrayal, the absolute bottom of human cruelty. She had rebuilt herself from nothing, created a new life with her own two hands. If she could do all that, surely she could do this. Surely she could let herself hope. "Yes," Clara said. "Yes, I'll let you." And when Cole Madron leaned in and kissed her under the vast Arizona sky, Clara Wynne, the woman who had been left behind, buried, forgotten, finally understood what it meant to be found. The kiss ended, but something else began. Clara pulled back slowly, her eyes still closed, her heart racing with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. When she finally opened her eyes, Cole was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between wonder and worry, hope and hesitation. "I should apologize," he said quietly. "For what?" "For moving too fast, for taking advantage, for—" "Cole?" Clara pressed her fingers to his lips, silencing him. "You didn't take anything I wasn't willing to give. And if anyone should apologize, it's me. I'm a married woman, legally at least. What we just did, you're a widow," Cole interrupted firmly. "Maybe not in the eyes of the law, but in every way that matters. Your husband buried you. He mourned you. He moved on. As far as the world is concerned, Clara Wynne is dead. And who am I now? That's for you to decide." They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of the question hanging between them. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to the small human dramas playing out beneath them. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, a lonesome sound that seemed to capture everything Clara was feeling. "I need time," she said finally. "Not because I don't want this. I do, more than I've wanted anything in a long time. But I need to figure out who I am before I can figure out who I am with someone else." Does that make sense? "Perfect sense." Cole's voice was gentle, without a trace of disappointment. "I'm not going anywhere, Clara. Take all the time you need." "What if it takes years?" "Then I'll wait years." "What if I decide I'm better off alone?" Cole smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his weathered face into something almost beautiful. "Then I'll respect that. But I don't think you will. I think you've been alone long enough. I think you're ready for something different. How can you be so sure? Because I see the way you look at me when you think I'm not watching. Because I hear the way your voice changes when we talk. Because you kissed me back just now like I was the only thing keeping you anchored to the earth. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I'm not sure of much in this life, Clara, but I'm sure of you. The words settled into her chest like warm honey, filling spaces she hadn't known were empty. Clara wanted to argue, to point out all the reasons this couldn't work, all the ways it could go wrong. But the words wouldn't come. For once, the voice of doubt that had governed her life for so long was silent. I should go inside, she said instead. Mrs. Henderson will be wondering. Mrs. Henderson is probably watching us through the curtains and already planning the wedding. Clara laughed, a surprised, genuine sound that seemed to startle them both. You're terrible. I've been called worse. He stood, offering his hand to help her up. Clara took it, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip. When she was on her feet, he didn't let go immediately. They stood there on the porch, hand in hand, the night wrapping around them like a blanket. I have to ride out tomorrow, Cole said. Another scouting mission, up near the Verde Valley. I'll be gone at least 3 weeks, maybe longer. Be careful. Always am. I mean it, Cole. Don't take unnecessary risks. Don't be a hero, just come back. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or gratitude. Is that an order? It's a request. From someone who has already lost too many people. Cole raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so old-fashioned and tender that it made Clara's breath catch. I'll come back, he said. I promise. And then he was walking down the porch steps, mounting his horse, disappearing into the darkness. Clara watched until she couldn't see him anymore, until even the sound of hoofbeats had faded into silence. Then she turned and went inside, carrying the warmth of his promise with her like a lantern in the dark. The 3 weeks that followed were the longest of Clara's life. She threw herself into work with renewed intensity, arriving at the general store before dawn and staying until well after sunset. Mr. Wilson, who had initially been skeptical of hiring a woman, now relied on her completely, trusting her to manage the books, deal with suppliers, handle the more difficult customers. She had a talent for the work, he told her. A head for numbers, and a way with people that he'd never been able to master. But no matter how busy she kept herself, thoughts of Cole crept in. She would be weighing flour and suddenly remember the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. She would be stocking shelves and think about his hand on her cheek, warm and rough and impossibly gentle. At night, lying in her small room at Mrs. Henderson's, she would replay their conversations in her mind, searching for hidden meanings, second-guessing every word she had said. It was ridiculous, she told herself. She was a grown woman, not a schoolgirl with a crush. She had been married, for God's sake. She knew what love was, or at least she knew what it wasn't. What she felt for Cole was different, deeper, more terrifying in its intensity. You're thinking about him again, Mrs. Henderson observed one evening as they sat together in the parlor. The older woman was knitting, she was always knitting, producing an endless stream of socks and scarves and blankets that she distributed to anyone who needed them. I don't know what you mean. You've been staring at that same page for 10 minutes. Either you've forgotten how to read, or your mind is elsewhere. Clara closed the book she had been pretending to read. Is it that obvious? Honey, a blind man could see it. You light up like a lantern every time someone mentions his name. We've only known each other a few weeks. It's too soon to feel this way. It's not sensible. Since when has love ever been sensible? Mrs. Henderson's needles clicked rhythmically. I fell for my Henry the first time I saw him. He was standing in the middle of Main Street, arguing with a mule that had sat down and refused to move. He was red in the face, waving his arms, threatening that mule with everything from a whipping to eternal damnation. And I thought to myself, that is the most ridiculous man I have ever seen. I'm going to marry him. And did you? Marry him? 3 months later, best decision I ever made. Mrs. Henderson's hand stilled, her eyes growing distant. We had 22 years together before the war took him. 22 years of laughter and arguments and making up after arguments. 22 years of building something real. And I wouldn't trade a single day of it. not even the hard ones. How did you know? That he was the right one? I didn't. Not for certain. You never do. Love isn't about certainty, it's about choice. Every day you choose to stay. Every day you choose to try. And if you're lucky, if you're blessed, you find someone who makes that choice easy. Someone who makes staying feel like coming home. Clara thought about Thomas, about all the days she had chosen to stay with him, all the time she had tried to make their marriage work. It had never felt like coming home. It had felt like imprisonment, like slowly drowning in someone else's life. But Cole felt different. With Cole, she didn't have to pretend to be smaller than she was. She didn't have to hide her intelligence or bite back her opinions or make herself less to make him more. He seemed to genuinely enjoy her strength, her stubbornness, the sharp edges that Thomas had always tried to sand down. What if I'm wrong? Claire asked. What if I let myself fall for him and he turns out to be just like Thomas? He's not like Thomas. You barely know him. I know enough. Mrs. Henderson set down her knitting and fixed Clara with a steady gaze. I've been watching Cole Madron for 5 years now, ever since he started coming through Kingman on army business. I've seen how he treats people, not just the important ones, but the ones most folks overlook. The miners with no money, the Indians who come to trade, the women working the saloons. He treats them all with respect, with dignity. A man who does that, who sees the humanity in everyone he meets, that's not a man who would leave his wife to die in the desert. Claire felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them back, frustrated by her own emotion. I'm scared, she admitted. I've never been this scared of anything in my life. Good. That means it matters. Mrs. Henderson reached over and patted her hand. Fear isn't the enemy, Clara. Fear just means you have something worth losing. The trick is not letting it stop you from reaching for what you want. Clara turned Mrs. Henderson's words over in her mind for days afterward. She thought about fear, about choice, about the difference between staying and coming home. She thought about the life she had left behind, the empty routine of her marriage, the slow suffocation of her spirit, and the life that was opening up before her now, terrifying and uncertain and full of possibility. And she made a decision. The next time Cole Madron rode into Kingman, she would tell him the truth. All of it, the fear, the hope, the terrifying depth of her feelings. She would stop hiding behind caution and practicality and let herself be vulnerable in a way she had never allowed before. It was the bravest thing she had ever done, and she hadn't even done it yet. Cole returned on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 days later than expected. Clara was in the back room of the general store, unpacking a shipment of dry goods, when she heard his voice at the counter. She set down the sack of cornmeal she had been lifting and wiped her hands on her apron, her heart suddenly pounding. He's asking for you, Mr. Wilson said, poking his head through the doorway. That's Scout. Should I tell him you're busy? No, I'll be right there. She took a moment to compose herself, smoothing her hair and checking her reflection in the small mirror that hung on the wall. She looked tired. There were shadows under her eyes, a tightness around her mouth that hadn't been there a few weeks ago. But there was color in her cheeks now, and something in her gaze that looked almost like hope. When she walked out to the front of the store, Cole was leaning against the counter, looking exactly as she remembered him, dusty from the trail, a few days' worth of stubble on his jaw, those whiskey-colored eyes lighting up when he saw her. You're late, she said. Ran into some trouble up north. Nothing serious, but it slowed me down. What kind of trouble? The kind that involves too many men and not enough bullets. He straightened, his expression sobering. I'm fine, Clara. A few bruises, nothing more. But I thought about you out there. Thought about you a lot. Clara was aware of Mr. Wilson hovering nearby, pretending to arrange canned goods while obviously listening to every word. She made a decision. Mr. Wilson, I'm going to take my lunch break now. Will you be all right alone for an hour? Take 2 hours, the old man said, not bothering to hide his grin. It's a slow day. Clara untied her apron and hung it on its hook, then walked around the counter to where Cole was standing. Without a word, she took his hand and led him out of the store, into the bright Arizona sunshine. Where are we going? He asked. Somewhere we can talk without half the town listening. They walked in silence through the dusty streets, past the saloon and the blacksmith's forge and the small church at the edge of town. Clara led him to a spot she had discovered during her long, sleepless nights, a low rise overlooking the desert, shaded by a stand of cottonwood trees that somehow survived in this harsh landscape. "I found this place a few weeks ago," she said, sitting down on a flat rock and patting the space beside her. "I come here when I need to think." Cole sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders were almost touching. "What do you think about?" "Everything. Nothing. The past, the future." She paused. "You. Good thoughts, I hope." "Terrifying thoughts, mostly." Clara turned to face him, drawing one knee up to her chest. "I've been doing a lot of thinking while you were gone, Cole. About us. About what happened that night on the porch. And I realized something." "What's that?" "I realized that I've spent my entire life being afraid. Afraid of being alone. Afraid of not being good enough. Afraid of wanting things I wasn't supposed to want. And that fear, it made me small. It made me accept a life that was slowly killing me, because at least it was safe. At least I knew what to expect." Cole listened in silence, his expression intent. "But then I woke up in the desert," Clara continued, "and I realized that safety is an illusion. You can do everything right, follow all the rules, make all the sensible choices, and still end up abandoned and dying under a merciless sun. So what's the point of being afraid? What's the point of playing it safe when safe doesn't actually protect you from anything?" That's a hard lesson to learn. It's the only lesson worth learning. Clara reached out and took his hand, feeling the rough warmth of his palm against hers. "I don't know where this is going, Cole. I don't know if we'll work out or fall apart or something in between. But I know that I don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering what might have happened if I'd been brave enough to find out. So I'm choosing to find out. I'm choosing you, if you'll have me." Cole was quiet for a long moment. Then he raised their joined hands to his lips and kissed her knuckles, just as he had done that night on the porch. "I've been waiting my whole life for someone to choose me," he said quietly, "to look at all the broken pieces and decide I was worth putting back together. I'd given up hoping it would ever happen. And then I found you in the desert, more dead than alive, and something inside me just knew. Knew that you were the one I'd been waiting for. Knew that whatever happened next, I couldn't let you slip away. Even though I'm a mess? Even though I'm carrying around more baggage than a stagecoach? We're all carrying baggage, Clara. The question is whether you want to carry it alone or with someone who'll help you bear the weight." But Clara felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Not tears of sadness this time, but something else entirely. Relief, maybe. Or joy. Or the overwhelming sensation of finally being seen. "I'm going to cry now," she warned him. "I'm sorry, I don't usually—" Cole gathered her into his arms, pulling her against his chest, one hand stroking her hair. "Cry all you want. I'm not going anywhere." And she did. She cried for the girl she had been, starving for love and settling for crumbs. She cried for the woman who had almost died in the desert, abandoned by everyone she trusted. She cried for all the years she had wasted trying to be what someone else wanted, instead of who she actually was. And when the tears finally stopped, when she pulled back and looked at Cole through swollen eyes, she felt lighter than she had in years, cleaner, like something old and rotten had been washed away, leaving space for something new to grow. "Better?" Cole asked, wiping her cheeks with his thumbs. "Much better." Clara managed a watery smile. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to fall apart like that. Don't apologize. Everyone needs to fall apart sometimes. The important thing is having someone to help you put the pieces back together." He kissed her forehead, soft and reverent. "And I plan on being that someone for a very long time." They sat together on that low rise until the sun began to sink toward the horizon, talking and not talking, simply existing in each other's presence. Clara told him about her nightmares, the ones where she woke up in the desert and no one came, the ones where Thomas found her and dragged her back to a life of quiet desperation. Cole told her about his own demons, the guilt he carried from battles long past, the faces of men he couldn't save, the loneliness that had become his constant companion. They were two damaged people, broken in different ways, finding something in each other that neither had known they were missing. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy, but it was real, and that was more than either of them had dared to hope for. The following weeks took on a rhythm of their own. Cole's duties kept him away more often than not. Scouting missions that took him deep into the wilderness, sometimes for days at a time, sometimes for weeks. But whenever he returned to Kingman, he came straight to Clara. They would walk together through the dusty streets, sharing meals at Mrs. Henderson's table, sitting on the porch until the stars came out. He taught her things she had never learned, practical skills that Thomas had dismissed as unfeminine. How to read tracks in the desert sand. How to identify edible plants from poisonous ones. How to start a fire with nothing but a piece of flint and a handful of dry grass. How to shoot a pistol, though Clara was a terrible shot, and they both knew it. "You're aiming too high," Cole said patiently, standing behind her as she squinted at the row of bottles they had set up on a fence rail. "Lower your sights. Let the gun do the work." "I am letting the gun do the work. The gun is just doing it badly." "The gun is doing exactly what you tell it to, which is why all the bottles are still standing." Clara huffed in frustration, lowering the weapon. "Maybe I'm just not cut out for this. Maybe I should stick to what I'm good at." "Which is?" "Not shooting guns, apparently." Cole laughed, a sound that still caught Clara off guard, even after all these weeks. He was so serious most of the time, so guarded, that his laughter felt like a gift each time she heard it. "Here." He stepped closer, adjusting her grip on the pistol. His chest was warm against her back, his arms bracketing hers. "Relax your shoulders. You're too tense. Breathe in. Now out. And squeeze." Clara fired. The bottle on the far right exploded in a shower of glass. "I did it!" She spun around, nearly dropping the gun in her excitement. "Did you see that? I actually hit something." "I saw." Cole was grinning, looking almost as pleased as she felt. "Told you that you could do it." 1 bottle out of 6. That's hardly impressive. "It's a start. Everything has to start somewhere." Clara looked at the pistol in her hands, then at the man standing beside her, and felt a rush of gratitude so intense it nearly knocked her over. This was what she had been missing all her life. Not just love, though she was beginning to admit slowly and with great reluctance that what she felt for Cole was probably love, but partnership. Someone who saw her potential instead of her limitations, someone who wanted to build her up instead of tearing her down. "Why are you so patient with me?" she asked. "I must be the worst student you've ever had." "You're not a student, you're a survivor. And survivors don't give up just because something is hard. They keep trying until they get it right." He took the pistol from her hands and began to reload it. "Besides, teaching you is the most fun I've had in years, even if you can't hit the broadside of a barn." "I hit the bottle." 1 bottle, out of 6, at 20 feet. Clara swatted his arm, but she was laughing. When had she started laughing so easily? When had the world stopped feeling like a weight she had to carry and started feeling like something she could actually enjoy? She knew the answer, of course. She just wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. The Henderson homestead came into her life on a cold November morning. She had been at the general store, helping Mr. Wilson take inventory, when a woman burst through the door, wild-eyed and breathless, her dress torn and her face streaked with tears. "Please," the woman gasped. "Please, I need help. My children, they're sick, both of them, and my husband rode out 2 days ago and hasn't come back. I don't know what to do. I don't—" "Slow down." Clara came around the counter, taking the woman's hands. "Tell me your name." "Henderson, Sarah Henderson. We have a homestead about 5 miles north of town. My husband James went to check on the cattle and he hasn't—" Her voice broke. "Something's wrong. I know something's wrong. And the children are burning up with fever and I can't do this alone." Henderson. The name hit Clara like a physical blow. For a moment she was back in the desert, reading a letter written by a stranger's hand. "Martha saw you breathing when they carried you out." But this was a different Henderson. Had to be, because the Martha from the wagon train would be hundreds of miles away by now, somewhere in California, living the life that was supposed to be Clara's. "I'll help you," Clara heard herself say. "Let me get my things." She didn't think about whether it was wise or safe or sensible. She didn't think about the work she was leaving behind, the questions Mr. Wilson would have, the danger of riding out to an isolated homestead with nothing but a stranger's word to guide her. She thought only of the terror in this woman's eyes, a terror she recognized because she had felt it herself not so long ago. The ride to the Henderson homestead took nearly an hour. Sarah Henderson drove the wagon with hands that trembled on the reins while Clara sat beside her and tried to keep her calm. The homestead, when they finally reached it, was a modest structure, a two-room cabin with a small barn and a vegetable garden that had been ravaged by the first frost. Inside, Clara found two children, a boy of perhaps 8 and a girl of 5, lying on pallets near the fire, their faces flushed and their breathing labored. The fever had hit them hard, just as it had hit Clara in the desert, and she felt her heart clench with remembered fear. But she wasn't helpless anymore. She had learned things during her recovery at Mrs. Henderson's, not the healing arts exactly, but the practical knowledge that came from surviving. She knew how to cool a fever with damp cloths. She knew which herbs to brew for tea that would ease breathing. She knew that sometimes the best medicine was simply being present, keeping watch through the long dark hours. "Where's your water?" Clara asked, already rolling up her sleeves. "The well, behind the house." "I'll need clean cloths, as many as you can find. And do you have any willow bark or elderflower?" Sarah stared at her with something like hope. "You know what to do?" "I know enough. Now go. We don't have time to waste." For the next 48 hours, Clara barely slept. She moved between the two children like a woman possessed, cooling their fevers, spooning broth between their cracked lips, changing their sweat-soaked linens as quickly as they became soaked again. Sarah worked beside her, following her instructions without question, too exhausted and too grateful to ask how a store clerk had learned to care for the sick. On the third morning, the fever broke. Clara was dozing in a chair beside the little girl's pallet when the child opened her eyes, clear and bright, without the glassy sheen of illness. "Mama?" the girl whispered. Sarah, who had been sleeping on the floor nearby, jerked awake immediately. When she saw her daughter's face, she burst into tears. "Oh, thank God! Oh, thank God! Thank God!" "The boy?" Clara asked, struggling to clear the fog of exhaustion from her mind. "His fever broke an hour ago. He's sleeping now." Sarah gathered her daughter into her arms, rocking back and forth, tears streaming down her face. "You saved them. You saved my babies." "The fever ran its course. I just helped them through it." "No." Sarah looked at her over her daughter's head, her expression fierce. "I know what would have happened if you hadn't come. I've seen children die from this, watched them slip away while their mothers stood helpless. You knew what to do. You stayed. You saved them." Clara didn't know how to respond to such naked gratitude. She busied herself with tidying the sick room, straightening blankets that didn't need straightening, avoiding Sarah's tearful gaze. "Your husband," she said finally. "Has there been any word?" Sarah's face fell. "No, nothing." As if summoned by the question, the sound of approaching hoofbeats reached them through the cabin walls. Sarah rushed to the door, flinging it open with a cry of hope. And there was Cole Madron, riding beside a man whose arm was bound in a makeshift sling, leading a horse that looked like it had been through a war. "James!" Sarah ran to meet them, nearly pulling her husband from the saddle in her desperation to embrace him. "James, where have you been? What happened? I was sure—" "Horse threw me," James Henderson said, wincing as he dismounted. "Broke my arm. Couldn't get back on. Crawled to the old Miller place and holed up there, waiting for someone to find me. This man—" He gestured to Cole. "He was riding by on scout business, heard me calling for help." Clara had emerged from the cabin by this point, and Cole's eyes found hers across the dusty yard. Something passed between them, relief, understanding, the particular recognition of two people who kept finding each other in unexpected places. "Clara," he said, "I should have known you'd be here. Where else would I be? Anywhere safe, anywhere sensible." But he was smiling as he said it, and the worry in his eyes softened into something warmer. "Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house told me you'd ridden out here when you didn't come back last night. Thought I'd better make sure you hadn't gotten yourself into trouble. The children were sick. Someone had to help. Someone always has to help. It just always seems to be you." He dismounted, walking toward her with that easy confidence that still made her heart skip. When he reached her, he didn't touch her. They were still cautious about displaying affection in public, but his presence was touch enough. The warmth of him, the solidity, the unspoken promise that he would always, always come to find her. "You look terrible," he said quietly. "You always know just what to say." "I mean it. When did you last sleep?" "I'll sleep later. The children needed—" "Clara." His voice was gentle but firm. "The children are better. Their father is home. You've done your part. Now let someone else take care of you for a change." Clara wanted to argue. She always wanted to argue, but the exhaustion was catching up with her, pressing down on her shoulders like a physical weight. She swayed slightly, and Cole's hand shot out to steady her, propriety be damned. "I'm taking you back to town," he said. "Now, no arguments." For once, Clara didn't have the energy to argue. The ride back to Kingman passed in a blur. Clara dozed in the saddle, leaning against Cole's chest, vaguely aware of his arm around her waist, and the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves. By the time they reached Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, she was more asleep than awake. Cole carried her inside, over her mumbled protests, and deposited her on her bed with instructions to Mrs. Henderson not to let her move for at least 12 hours. Then he disappeared, presumably to report on James Henderson's rescue and continue whatever scout business had brought him to town. Clara slept for 15 hours straight. When she finally woke, the light slanting through her window was the golden orange of late afternoon. Her body ached in places she hadn't known could ache, and her mouth tasted like something had crawled into it and died. But beneath the physical discomfort was a profound sense of satisfaction. She had saved those children, not single-handedly, not heroically, but through steady effort and accumulated knowledge and the simple refusal to give up. It was the same stubbornness that had carried her 20 miles through the desert, the same determination that had rebuilt her life from nothing. Maybe Cole was right. Maybe she was built for more than safe. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in." Mrs. Henderson entered, carrying a tray laden with food. "Finally awake, I see. I was starting to think we'd have to carry you to the doctor." "I'm fine, just tired." "Tired." Mrs. Henderson set the tray on the bedside table with more force than strictly necessary. "You nearly killed yourself nursing those children. What were you thinking?" "I was thinking that they needed help, and I knew how to give it." "And what would have happened if you'd collapsed out there? If the fever had taken you too? You're not invincible, Clara. You nearly died 2 months ago. Your body hasn't fully recovered. You can't—" "I can't stand by and watch children die when I know how to help them." Clara pushed herself up against the pillows, meeting the older woman's gaze. "I know it wasn't sensible. I know I took risks, but I'm not sorry. I'd do it again." Mrs. Henderson was silent for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. "You remind me of myself," she said, "when I was young and stupid and thought I could save the world. I don't think I can save the world, just the pieces I can reach. That's all any of us can do." Mrs. Henderson sat down on the edge of the bed, her expression softening. "Eat something. Cole's been by 3 times asking after you. I finally told him if he came back again, I'd put him to work cleaning the stables." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. He was worried? "That man is head over heels for you, and everyone in town knows it except apparently you." Mrs. Henderson shook her head, but she was still smiling. "Eat. Rest. I'll tell him you're awake when he comes by again, which will probably be in about 10 minutes, knowing him." She left, closing the door softly behind her. Clara looked at the food on the tray, roast chicken, fresh bread, vegetables she couldn't even name, and realized she was absolutely ravenous. She ate everything, scraping the plate clean, then lay back against the pillows and waited. True to Mrs. Henderson's prediction, Cole arrived within the hour. He entered the room quietly, hat in hand, looking uncertain in a way that was completely unlike him. When he saw her sitting up in bed, some of the tension drained from his shoulders. "You're awake." "So I'm told." "How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd of cattle. Again." Clara smiled to soften the words. "But I'll live. Apparently I'm difficult to kill." Cole crossed the room and sat in the chair beside her bed, the same chair Mrs. Henderson had occupied during Clara's recovery from the desert. He looked exhausted, she realized. Dark circles under his eyes, a tightness around his mouth that suggested he hadn't slept much either. "I heard what you did," he said, "at the Henderson place." "Mrs. Henderson, the other one, Sarah. She couldn't stop talking about it." Said you saved her children's lives. I helped, that's all. You did more than help. You walked into a dangerous situation without knowing what you'd find. You stayed for 3 days nursing sick children while their father was missing. You put yourself at risk for people you'd never met. He shook his head, something like wonder in his expression. Most people wouldn't do that. Most people haven't been left to die in the desert. When you've been that alone, that helpless, Clara struggled to find the words. You know what it means to have someone show up, to not be abandoned. I couldn't leave those children to face that alone. I couldn't be the person who rode past. Like I didn't ride past you. Exactly. Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he reached out and took her hand, lacing their fingers together. I know I said I'd wait, he said slowly. Wait until you figured out who you were, what you wanted. And I meant it. I'll wait as long as you need. But I have to tell you something, Clara. Something I've been carrying around for weeks now. Clara's heart began to pound. What is it? I love you. The words hung in the air between them, simple and terrifying and utterly true. I know it's too soon, Cole continued, his voice rough. I know you've been hurt, and you're still healing, and the last thing you need is some fool scout declaring his feelings. But I can't keep it inside anymore. I love you. I love your strength and your stubbornness, and the way you refuse to give up on anyone, including yourself. I love that you walked 20 miles through the desert on willpower alone. I love that you spent 3 days saving children you'd never met because you knew what it meant to be abandoned. I love... He stopped, swallowing hard. I love everything about you, and I'll keep loving you whether you can say it back or not. I just needed you to know. Clara stared at him, this man who had appeared out of the desert like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known she was praying. This man who had carried her when she couldn't walk, who had taught her to shoot and start fires and trust again. This man who looked at her like she was something precious, something worth saving. I love you too, she said. The words came out easier than she expected. They felt natural, right? Like a key sliding into a lock it was made for. I love you, she repeated, stronger this time. I think I have since that first day, when you found me dying and decided I was worth saving. I've been too scared to say it, too afraid that if I admitted how I felt, something would happen to take it away. But I don't want to be afraid anymore. I don't want to hide. I love you, Cole Madron, and whatever comes next, whatever challenges or dangers or complications, I want to face them with you. Cole's face transformed. The worry melted away, replaced by a joy so profound it made him look like an entirely different person. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it, then leaned forward and kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the tip of her nose. I was so afraid, he murmured against her skin. After I found out where you'd gone, riding out to that homestead, putting yourself in danger, I thought I'd lost you before I ever really had you. The whole ride there, I kept thinking, what if I'm too late? What if she's gone and I never got to tell her? I'm here, Clara interrupted. I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere. Promise me. I promise. Cole kissed her then, properly, deeply, with none of the hesitation of their first kiss on the porch. Clara wrapped her arms around his neck and pulled him closer, losing herself in the warmth of him, the rightness of him. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Cole rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, he said. Clara blinked. What? I know it's sudden. I know we've only known each other a few months, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Marry me, Clara. Let me spend the rest of my days proving to you that not everyone leaves. Let me build a life with you, a real life, full of laughter and arguments and everything in between. Let me... Yes. Cole stopped mid-sentence. Yes? Yes, I'll marry you. Clara was crying again, but laughing too, the two emotions tangled together in a way that felt entirely appropriate. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. I don't care if it's sudden. I don't care if it's sensible. I've spent my whole life being sensible, and it nearly got me killed. I want to be brave now. I want to take the risk. I want you. Cole made a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and crushed her against his chest. They held each other for a long time, neither speaking, neither needing to speak. The late afternoon light streamed through the window, painting everything gold. Somewhere downstairs, Claire could hear Mrs. Henderson moving around, probably starting preparations for dinner. Outside, the sounds of Kingman drifted up, horses and wagons, voices calling to each other, the everyday symphony of a frontier town going about its business. Life continuing, life going on. And for the first time since she had woken up alone in the desert, Clara felt like she was truly part of it. The engagement set Kingman's small community buzzing with gossip and goodwill. Mrs. Henderson, who had, as Cole predicted, been planning the wedding practically since the day he carried Clara into her boarding house, threw herself into preparations with a fervor that bordered on frightening. Sarah Henderson, recovered now and grateful beyond measure for what Clara had done, insisted on hosting the engagement dinner at their homestead. Even Mr. Wilson contributed, gruffly offering Clara a raise and her pick of goods from the store for her trousseau. "You've earned it," he said when Clara tried to protest. "Besides, I can't have my best clerk walking around in rags. Bad for business." But it was Cole's reaction that meant the most to her. In the weeks that followed their engagement, he transformed from a lone scout into something approaching a settled man. He started talking about building a house, putting down roots. He looked at land north of Kingman with the practiced eye of someone assessing not just terrain, but possibility. "What do you think?" he asked one afternoon as they rode together through a stretch of rolling grassland dotted with juniper and piñon pine. "There's water nearby, a spring that runs year-round. Good grazing land, room for crops. We could build something here. Something that's ours." Clara looked at the land, trying to see it through his eyes. It was beautiful in a stark, unforgiving way, so different from the gentle green of her Boston childhood, but somehow more real, more honest. "It's perfect," she said, and meant it. They set the wedding for January. Cole had leave coming, and Mrs. Henderson insisted that a winter wedding would be romantic. Never mind that Arizona winters were nothing like the snow-covered fantasies she had grown up with back east. "We'll make do," she said firmly. "We always make do out here." As the weeks passed, Clara felt herself changing. The desperate dying woman who had woken up in the desert was fading, replaced by someone stronger, more certain, more whole. She still had nightmares sometimes, still woke in the small hours, gasping, convinced she was alone under a merciless sun, but Cole was always there to hold her through them, murmuring reassurance until the fear passed. "You're safe," he would say, his voice rough with sleep. "You're here. I've got you." And she believed him. That was the miracle. She actually believed him. But even as her new life took shape around her, even as happiness became something she could reach out and touch, a shadow lingered at the edges. Questions she had never answered. A past she had never fully buried. What had happened to the wagon train? What had happened to Thomas? Clara told herself she didn't care. Told herself that chapter of her life was closed, that the man who had left her to die deserved whatever fate had befallen him. But late at night, lying awake while Cole slept beside her, she wondered. She wondered if Thomas thought about her, wondered if guilt kept him awake, if regret haunted his days, wondered if he was still alive at all. The answer came on a bright December morning, 3 weeks before the wedding. Cole had ridden in the night before, earlier than expected from his latest scout mission. He had seemed agitated, distracted in a way that was completely unlike him, and Clara had assumed it was simply the stress of the job. She was wrong. "I need to tell you something," he said, as they sat together on Mrs. Henderson's porch, watching the sun come up over the desert. "Something I learned on the trail, something about your husband." Clara's blood went cold. "Thomas?" "The wagon train he was traveling with, the Morrison Company. They hit flash floods about 200 miles west of here, lost half their wagons, half their people." Cole paused, his jaw tight. Thomas Wynne was among the dead. The words hit her like a physical blow. Clara sat frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. Thomas was dead. The man who had buried her alive, who had left her to die in the desert, who had haunted her nightmares for months. He was gone. Truly gone. "How do you know?" she heard herself ask. "I ran into some survivors at a trading post. They were heading back east, what was left of them. I asked about the Morrison Company, said I was looking for a woman named Wynne. They told me Clara Wynne had died of fever, buried outside Kingman. But her husband," Cole's voice hardened, They said he drowned trying to save some of the supplies. Said he went into the water after a strongbox and never came back up. Clara closed her eyes. She could picture it perfectly. Thomas, who had always cared more about money than people, diving into floodwaters to save a box of coins and papers. Thomas, who had left his living wife to die because she was inconvenient, dying himself in pursuit of things that didn't matter. There was a certain poetry to it, a certain justice. But what she felt wasn't satisfaction, wasn't the vindication she might have expected. Instead, there was only emptiness, a hollow ache where her rage used to be. "Are you all right?" Cole asked softly. "I don't know." Clara opened her eyes, looking out at the desert that had almost killed her. "I thought I'd feel something more. Relief, maybe. Or closure. But I just feel empty. That makes sense? Does it? The man you married, the man you thought you knew, he died a long time ago. Maybe he was never real at all. What drowned in that flood was just the last reminder of a life you already left behind." Cole took her hand, his grip warm and steady. "You don't owe him grief, Clara. You don't owe him anything." "I know." Clara squeezed his hand. "But it still feels strange, knowing that it's truly over, that he can never find me, never drag me back, never—" She stopped, unable to finish the thought. "Never hurt you again, was," Cole finished for her. "That's the only thing that matters." They sat in silence for a long time, watching the sky lighten from pink to gold to brilliant blue. Clara let the news settle into her bones, let herself feel the weight of it, the finality. Thomas was dead. She was free. And the life stretching out before her, the life she was building with Cole, the home they would create together, the family they might someday have, it belonged to her now. Completely, irrevocably hers. When she finally turned to Cole, her eyes were dry and her voice was steady. "I think," she said slowly, "that I'm ready to get married." He looked at her, understanding dawning in his whiskey-colored eyes. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." Clara rose, pulling him to his feet. "The past is dead, Cole. Buried and drowned and gone forever. I don't want to waste another minute mourning it. I want to start our future right now. Today." "Today? Clara, the wedding isn't for 3 weeks. Then we'll move it up. Or we'll ride to Prescott and find a justice of the peace. Or we'll—" She stopped, laughing at her own urgency. "I don't care how we do it. I just don't want to wait anymore. I've spent my whole life waiting for things to get better, waiting for someone to save me, waiting for permission to be happy. I'm done waiting. I want to live." Cole looked at her, really looked, the way he had that first day in the desert, when he had seen something worth saving in her half-dead body. "All right," he said. "All right? All right, let's live." He pulled her close, kissing her with a tenderness that made her knees weak. "But we're not riding to Prescott. Mrs. Henderson would never forgive us. We'll have the wedding here in Kingman with everyone who's come to love you watching." "In 3 weeks?" "In 3 weeks." He smiled, that rare, genuine smile that still caught her off guard. "But between now and then, we're going to spend every single day celebrating the fact that you're alive, that I found you, and that we have the rest of our lives ahead of us." Clara smiled back, feeling something break loose in her chest, some last piece of the old, frightened Clara finally letting go. "That," she said, "sounds like the best plan I've ever heard." And as they walked back inside together, hand in hand, Clara Wynne, the woman who had been left behind, buried, given up for dead, finally understood what it meant to come home. The days following Cole's revelation moved differently for Clara, as if time itself had shifted into a new rhythm. She woke each morning with the knowledge settling deeper into her bones. Thomas was dead. The man who had abandoned her, who had told everyone she had perished, who had buried an empty coffin and walked away without looking back. He was gone. Drowned in the same indifferent wilderness that had nearly claimed her. There should have been grief. Some part of her kept waiting for it, kept bracing for the wave of sorrow that surely must come when a wife learns of her husband's death. But the grief never arrived. What came instead was something stranger, something harder to name, a slow unwinding of tension she hadn't even realized she was carrying, like a fist that had been clenched for years finally, finally relaxing. Clara stood at the window of her room at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, watching the first light of dawn paint the desert in shades of rose and gold. 3 weeks until her wedding. 3 weeks until she would stand before God and the people of Kingman and pledge herself to Cole Madron. 3 weeks until Clara Wynne, the woman Thomas had buried in that empty grave, would truly cease to exist. The thought should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like freedom. A soft knock at her door pulled her from her reverie. "Come in." Mrs. Henderson entered carrying a cup of coffee, her face creased with the particular expression of someone who has something difficult to say. She set the cup on Clara's dresser and stood there for a moment, hands clasped in front of her apron. "I heard the news," she said finally, "about your husband. Cole told me last night. I assumed he would. How are you feeling, child?" Clara considered the question carefully. "I don't know how to answer that. I should feel something, shouldn't I? Sadness or relief or anger. But mostly I just feel quiet, like a storm has passed, and I'm still waiting to see what's left standing." Mrs. Henderson nodded slowly. "That makes sense. You've been through more than most people experience in a lifetime. It takes time for the heart to catch up with the mind." "Is that what this is? My heart catching up?" "Could be. Or it could be that you already did your grieving for the marriage you thought you had, the man you thought you knew. What died in that flood was just the last echo of something that was already gone." Clara turned from the window, struck by how closely Mrs. Henderson's words echoed Cole's. "He said something similar. That man loves you something fierce. Anyone with eyes can see it." Mrs. Henderson's expression softened. "He also asked me to keep an eye on you today. Said you might need someone to talk to, someone who isn't him. He worries too much. He worries exactly the right amount for a man who found the woman he loves half dead in the desert." Mrs. Henderson crossed the room and took Clara's hands in her own weathered ones. "I know you're strong. Lord knows you've proven that 100 times over. But being strong doesn't mean you have to carry everything alone. Let us help you, Clara. Let us be your family." The word hit Clara harder than she expected. Family. She had lost her family so young, her parents, her brothers, everyone who had known her before she became Thomas Wynne's wife. She had thought she would never have that again, never belong to anyone the way she had belonged to them. But here was Mrs. Henderson, this woman who had taken her in without question, who had nursed her back to health, who had watched her fall in love and celebrated every step of the journey. Here was Cole, who had ridden back for her when everyone else had ridden away. Here was a whole community of people who had opened their hearts to a stranger from the desert. Family wasn't just blood. Family was choice. "Thank you," Clara whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for everything." Mrs. Henderson pulled her into a fierce embrace, the kind of hug Clara's mother used to give, warm and all-encompassing and somehow capable of making everything feel manageable. "Now," Mrs. Henderson said, releasing her and wiping her eyes briskly, "enough of this sentimentality. We have a wedding to plan, and I won't have my best boarder moping around like a lost calf. Drink your coffee, get dressed, and meet me in the kitchen. We have work to do." Clara laughed, a genuine laugh, surprised out of her by Mrs. Henderson's matter-of-fact tone. "Yes, ma'am. That's more like it." The older woman swept out of the room, leaving Clara alone with her cooling coffee and her spinning thoughts. She drank it slowly, letting the bitter warmth spread through her chest, and tried to organize the chaos in her head. Thomas was dead. She was engaged to Cole. In 3 weeks she would have a new name, a new life, a new beginning. Everything she had lost in the desert had been replaced by something better, something real and true and worth fighting for. So why couldn't she shake the feeling that there was still something unfinished, some weight she was carrying that she hadn't yet learned to set down? The answer came to her later that morning, as she walked through Kingman's dusty streets on her way to the general store. She was passing the small church at the edge of town, the same church where she and Cole would marry in 3 weeks, when the realization struck her with the force of a physical blow. She had never mourned herself, not the marriage, not Thomas, not the life she had left behind in Boston, but herself, Clara Wynne, the woman who had woken up in the desert to find that everyone she trusted had given her up for dead. That woman had died out there in some real and terrible way. The fever had burned through her, the sun had scorched her, The betrayal had broken something fundamental in her understanding of the world, and she had never stopped to grieve for what was lost. She had been too busy surviving, rebuilding, falling in love. She had pushed forward through sheer force of will, never allowing herself to look back at the wreckage. But the wreckage was still there, and until she faced it, really faced it, she would never be truly free. Clara changed direction, walking not toward the general store but toward the edge of town, toward the desert that stretched endlessly in every direction. She walked until the buildings fell away behind her, until the sounds of civilization faded into silence, until she stood alone on the same red earth that had almost claimed her life. The desert was beautiful today. The winter sun hung low in a crystalline sky, casting long shadows across the landscape. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals with effortless grace. In the distance, the mountains rose like sentinels, their peaks dusted with snow. Clara sank to her knees in the dirt, and for the first time since Cole had found her, she allowed herself to truly feel. The grief came in waves, not for Thomas, not for her marriage, but for herself. For the innocent girl who had left Boston with dreams of a better life, for the hopeful bride who had believed her husband's promises, for the woman who had lain in that wagon, burning with fever, while the people around her decided she wasn't worth saving. She cried for the terror of waking up alone, of reading that letter and understanding what had been done to her. She cried for the 20 miles she had walked on legs that could barely hold her, for the desperate prayer that someone, anyone, would come. She cried for every moment of doubt since then, every nightmare that had ripped her from sleep, every time she had flinched from happiness because she was afraid it would be taken away. And when the tears finally stopped, when she had emptied herself of everything she had been holding back, Clara felt something shift inside her. The weight she had been carrying, the one she couldn't name, couldn't identify, it wasn't gone exactly, but it was lighter now, shared with the desert that had witnessed her lowest moment and her greatest triumph. "I survived," she said aloud, her voice rough from crying. "I survived, and I'm going to keep surviving. And nothing is ever going to make me feel that small again." The words echoed off the rocks and faded into silence. The desert didn't answer. It never did. But Clara hadn't expected it to. She had spoken the words for herself, as a declaration, as a promise. She rose to her feet, brushing the dust from her skirt. The sun was higher now, the day warming despite the winter chill. She turned back toward town, toward the life she was building, toward the man who was waiting for her. And she walked forward without looking back. Cole found her at the general store that afternoon, elbow deep in inventory lists and purchase orders. He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her work, before she noticed his presence. "How long have you been standing there?" she asked. "Long enough to know you're beautiful when you're concentrating." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks despite herself. "Flattery won't get you anywhere, Mr. Madron." "Who said I was trying to get anywhere?" He crossed the room, leaning against the counter with that easy confidence she had come to love. "Mrs. Henderson told me you went out this morning, walked toward the desert. I needed some air. And did you find it?" Clara set down her pen, meeting his eyes. "I found something better. I found closure, I suppose. Or the beginning of it, anyway." Cole's expression softened. "You want to talk about it?" "Not right now, but later, when we have more time. I'll hold you to that." He reached across the counter and took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I have something for you. A wedding present, though I know it's early." "You didn't have to." "I wanted to." He released her hand and reached into his vest pocket, producing a small velvet pouch. "This was my mother's. She gave it to me before she died, said I should give it to the woman I married. I've been carrying it around for 15 years, waiting for someone who deserved it." Clara took the pouch with trembling fingers. Inside was a ring, simple gold band set with a small turquoise stone, the color of the Arizona sky on a clear day. "Cole," she breathed, "it's beautiful." "It's not much. My family never had money, but my mother loved that ring, said my father gave it to her when they had nothing, and it meant more to her than any diamond could." "It's perfect." Clara slid the ring onto her finger, watching the turquoise catch the light. "It's absolutely perfect. Like you. I'm far from perfect. That's what makes you perfect." Cole leaned across the counter and kissed her, a brief, sweet press of lips that still managed to make her heart race. I have to ride out again tomorrow. Short mission, just a few days, but I'll be back before you know it. You always are. I always will be. He straightened, settling his hat back on his head. Try not to save any more children while I'm gone. I make no promises. He laughed, that rare, genuine laugh she treasured, and walked out, leaving Clara alone with her inventory lists and her new ring and the warm glow of being loved by a good man. The days passed in a flurry of wedding preparations. Mrs. Henderson recruited half the women in town to help with sewing, cooking, decorating. Sarah Henderson insisted on contributing fabric for Clara's dress, fine white cotton, that she had been saving for her own daughter's wedding someday. Mr. Wilson donated supplies from the store, gruffly refusing any payment. Even the miners and ranchers, men who rarely showed their softer sides, stopped by with awkward congratulations and offers of help. Clara had never experienced anything like it. In Boston, in her marriage to Thomas, she had always been on the outside looking in, tolerated but never truly embraced. Here, in this rough frontier town, she was part of something larger than herself, a community, a family. It was overwhelming and wonderful, and sometimes, in quiet moments, almost too much to bear. Cole returned 4 days later, dusty and tired, but smiling when he saw her waiting on Mrs. Henderson's porch. He dismounted, tied his horse to the rail, and walked up the steps with a look in his eyes that made Clara's breath catch. "Missed you," he said simply. "You were only gone 4 days." Felt like 4 years? He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. Clara buried her face in his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of sage and leather and horse sweat. It should have been unpleasant. Instead, it smelled like home. "I have news," Cole said, pulling back slightly to look at her. "Good news, I think." "Tell me." "I spoke to the commander at Fort Whipple, told him about our wedding, about wanting to settle down." He paused, something flickering in his expression. Nervousness, maybe, or hope. "He offered me a position. Still scouting, but based out of Kingman instead of the fort. I'd be home most nights, gone for a few days at a time at most. No more month-long missions. No more disappearing for weeks on end." Clara stared at him. "You'd do that? Give up the long missions?" "I'd give up a lot more than that for you." Cole cupped her face in his hands, his calloused palms warm against her cheeks. "I've spent 8 years living out of saddlebags, moving from place to place, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. I didn't think I wanted anything different, but then I found you, and suddenly all those lonely nights on the trail felt like a waste. I want to build something, Clara, a home, a life, and I want to build it with you." Clara felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, happy tears, the kind she had almost forgotten existed. "I want that too, more than anything." Then it settled. Cole kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the tip of her nose. "We'll build our house on that land north of town. We'll fill it with children and laughter and all the things we both thought we'd never have. And every night, when I come home, you'll be there waiting, and I'll be the luckiest man alive." "You're already the luckiest man alive," Clara said, smiling through her tears. "You just don't know it yet." "Oh, I know it." He kissed her properly then, deep and slow, right there on the porch where anyone walking by could see. Clara didn't care. Let them see. Let the whole world see. She had nothing left to hide. The week before the wedding brought an unexpected visitor to Kingman. Clara was at the general store, helping Mr. Wilson rearrange the window display, when the stagecoach rolled into town. She barely glanced at it. Stagecoaches came through regularly, carrying miners and merchants and travelers of all sorts, but something made her look again. Something in the way one of the passengers was moving, searching the crowd with desperate eyes. The woman was perhaps 40, thin and careworn, dressed in clothes that had once been fine but were now faded and patched. She stepped down from the stagecoach and stood in the middle of the street, looking around with an expression of exhausted hope. "Excuse me," she called to a passing miner. "I'm looking for someone. A woman named Clara Wynne." Clara's heart stopped. She pressed back against the store's window, suddenly unable to breathe. No one here knew her by that name. She had been Clara to everyone in Kingman. Just Clara, no last name, no history, no connection to the woman who had been buried in the desert. But someone had found her anyway. "Don't know anyone by that name?" the miner said, and moved on. The woman turned to someone else, then someone else, receiving the same response each time. Clara watched, frozen, as she made her way down the street, asking everyone she passed. It was only a matter of time before someone pointed her toward the general store, toward the woman who had appeared out of nowhere a few months ago, toward the truth Clara had been trying to leave behind. But who was she? And how had she known where to look? Clara took a deep breath, steadied herself, and walked out of the store. "I'm Clara," she said, approaching the stranger. "Clara Wynne. Or I was before. What do you want?" The woman turned, and Clara saw the moment recognition dawned on her face. Her eyes went wide, her hand flying to her chest. "Oh, thank God," she breathed. "Thank God you're alive. Martha said she swore she saw you breathing, but no one believed her, and we had to keep moving, and I've been looking ever since." "Who are you?" "Sarah. Sarah Cooper." The name triggered a memory, a letter left in the desert, a note written by a stranger's hand. "I was with the Morrison Company. I left you that letter with the water and the food. I didn't think you'd survive, but I couldn't just leave you with nothing, and I've been carrying the guilt ever since." "You?" Claire's voice was barely a whisper. "You're the one who left the note." "I'm so sorry." Sarah Cooper was crying now, tears streaming down her weathered face. "I'm so sorry. I wanted to stay. I wanted to wait. But Morrison said we had to move, said the fever might spread, said..." She broke off, overcome by sobs. Clara stood frozen, not knowing what to feel. This was the woman who had given her a chance. The water, the food, the knowledge that Kingman was only 20 miles away. Without Sarah Cooper's intervention, she would have died in the desert without ever knowing which direction to walk. But Sarah Cooper was also part of the group that had left her, part of the company that had buried an empty coffin and moved on. Part of the system that had let Thomas's lie go unchallenged. "How did you find me?" Clara asked, her voice steady despite the tumult inside her. "I heard about the flood. About Thomas." Sarah wiped her eyes with a threadbare handkerchief. "I was in California trying to rebuild, but I couldn't stop thinking about you. Couldn't stop wondering what had happened. So I started asking questions, retracing our route. When I got to Kingman, I heard about a woman who had come out of the desert, a woman who had survived the fever and walked 20 miles alone. I knew it had to be you. And what do you want from me now? Forgiveness?" "No." Sarah shook her head firmly. "I don't deserve forgiveness. I'm not here for that. I'm here because I need to tell you something. Something about Thomas. Something that happened before the flood." Claire's blood went cold. "What about Thomas?" Sarah glanced around nervously, as if expecting someone to overhear. "Is there somewhere private we can talk?" Clara hesitated. Every instinct told her to walk away, to leave the past buried where it belonged. But curiosity was stronger than caution, and the look in Sarah Cooper's eyes suggested this was something she needed to hear. "Follow me." She led Sarah to the same rise overlooking the desert where she had sat with Cole, where she had made her decision to embrace the future. It seemed fitting, somehow, to bring the past to this place, to let the two collide and see what remained. They sat on the flat rock looking out at the vast expanse of red and brown and dusty green. Sarah took a shaky breath. Thomas wasn't who he said he was. Clara laughed, a short, bitter sound. "I figured that out when he left me to die in the desert." "No, I mean..." Sarah wrung her hands in her lap. "He wasn't Thomas Wynne. That wasn't his real name." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Clara gripped the edge of the rock to steady herself. "What are you saying?" "His real name was Thomas Alcott. He was wanted in 3 states for fraud and theft. He married women under false names, took their money, and abandoned them." Sarah's voice was flat, reciting facts she had clearly gone over many times in her mind. "I found out after the flood, when some men came looking for him. They had photographs, wanted posters. It was him, Clara. Your husband was a con man." Clara closed her eyes. The revelation should have devastated her, should have shattered what little remained of her memories of the man she had married, the life she had thought they were building together. Instead, it felt like the final piece of a puzzle sliding into place. Of course, Thomas had been a fraud. Of course, the charming man who had swept her off her feet, who had promised her the world, had been lying from the very beginning. It explained so much: his evasiveness about his past, his insistence on controlling their finances, his coldness after the wedding when he no longer needed to maintain the facade. "How many?" Clara asked quietly. "How many women before me?" "At least 3 that they know of. Probably more." Sarah's voice cracked. "I'm so sorry, Clara. I should have seen it. We all should have seen it. But he was so convincing, so charming." "I know." Clara opened her eyes, looking at the woman beside her. "I know exactly how convincing he was. He fooled me completely." "You're not angry?" "I'm furious, but not at you." Clara stood, brushing the dust from her skirt. "You didn't make him lie to me. You didn't make him leave me in the desert. You did what you could, Sarah. You left me a chance. That's more than anyone else did." Sarah stood as well, tears still streaming down her face. "I don't understand. After everything that happened, how can you be so calm?" "Because he's dead." Clara said the words without emotion, without regret. "Thomas Alcott, or Thomas Wynne, or whoever he really was, he's dead. And I'm alive. I survived his lies, his abandonment, his cruelty. I walked out of that desert and built a new life, a better life. He doesn't have power over me anymore. He never will again." "But don't you want to know—" "No." Clara's voice was firm. "I don't want to know about the other women or the crimes he committed or any of it. That's his story, not mine. My story starts in the desert, when I woke up alone and decided to live. Everything before that belongs to someone who doesn't exist anymore." Sarah stared at her with something like awe. "You're remarkable, do you know that? Most people would be destroyed by what you've been through." "I almost was destroyed. But I had help." Clara thought of Cole, of Mrs. Henderson, of the community that had embraced her. "I found people who showed me what I was worth, people who loved me for who I am, not who they wanted me to be. That's the difference, Sarah. That's what Thomas never understood. Love isn't about possession, it's about choice." They stood in silence for a long moment, the desert wind whipping around them. Then Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "I brought something else," she said. "Something that was yours. I took it from the wagon before they buried it. The coffin, I mean. I thought if you were dead, someone should have something to remember you by. And if you were alive—" She pressed the bundle into Clara's hands. "I wanted to return it." Clara unwrapped the cloth carefully. Inside was a locket, silver, tarnished with age, containing a tiny portrait of a woman and a man. Her parents. The only photograph she had of them, taken when they were young and hopeful and still believed the future would be kind. "Oh," Clara breathed, pressing the locket to her chest. "Oh, Sarah. You talked about them once, on the trail, said they were the only good thing about your past." Sarah's smile was watery but genuine. "I thought you should have them back." Clara didn't think. She just pulled Sarah into a fierce embrace, holding tight to this woman who had been a stranger a few months ago, who had carried Clara's grief and guilt across hundreds of miles just to return a small piece of her stolen life. "Thank you," Clara whispered. "Thank you." "It's the least I could do." Sarah pulled back, wiping her eyes. "I should go. I have a stage to catch. I'm heading back to California. But I'm glad I came. I'm glad I got to see that you're all right." "Better than all right." Clara looked down at the locket in her hands, at the faded faces of the parents she had loved and lost. "I'm getting married in a week, to a good man, a real man." "Then I'm happy for you, truly." Sarah began walking back toward town, then paused, looking over her shoulder. "Clara? For what it's worth, I think your parents would be proud of who you've become." And then she was gone, walking down the rise toward the stagecoach station, disappearing into the flow of strangers and travelers and people whose lives would never intersect with Clara's again. Clara stood alone on the rise, holding the locket, feeling the weight of everything Sarah had told her. Thomas had been a fraud, a con man, a criminal who had made a career of destroying women's lives. She had been his victim, yes, but she had also been his last victim. The flood that killed him had ended his reign of lies. There was justice in that. Cold comfort, perhaps, but justice nonetheless. Clara opened the locket and looked at her parents' faces. They seemed smaller than she remembered, less vivid, but they were hers, a piece of her history that no one could take away. "I'm all right," she told them softly. "I made it, and I'm going to be happy." The wind carried her words away. Clara closed the locket, slipped it around her neck, and walked back toward town. She had a wedding to prepare for. Cole took the news about Thomas's true identity with characteristic steadiness. He listened without interrupting as Clara recounted her conversation with Sarah Cooper, his expression growing darker with each revelation. "A con man," he said finally when she had finished. "That's what you married, a goddamn con man." "Language," Clara said mildly. "I'll use whatever language I want when discussing a man who made a career of ruining women." Cole paced the length of Mrs. Henderson's parlor, his hands clenched into fists. "If he wasn't already dead, I'd kill him myself." "That's very romantic." "I'm serious, Clara. What he did to you. What he did to all those women." Cole stopped pacing, turning to face her with something fierce in his eyes. "He didn't deserve you. He didn't deserve any of you. And I'm glad he's dead. I'm glad the river took him. It's better than he deserved." Clara rose from her chair and crossed to where he stood. She placed her hands on his chest, feeling his heart pounding beneath her palms. "It's over," she said quietly. "He's gone. The truth is out. And none of it changes what we have. None of it changes who I am now." I know it doesn't." Cole covered her hands with his own, some of the tension draining from his shoulders. "I just hate that you went through all of that you spent years with someone who was lying to you every single day. The years with Thomas taught me what I didn't want. They taught me to recognize the difference between real love and performance." Clara smiled up at him. "Without those years, I might not have recognized what I had when I found you." "Are you saying you're grateful for him?" "God, no. But I'm grateful for where I ended up, and maybe the path doesn't matter as much as the destination." Cole pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "You're too wise for your own good." "I'm wise enough to know when I've found something worth holding on to." Clara tilted her head back to look at him. "We're getting married in 6 days, Cole. Can we please stop talking about my dead criminal husband and focus on that instead?" A reluctant smile crossed his face. 6 days? Have I mentioned that I can't wait?" "Once or twice." "Well, I'm mentioning it again." He kissed her, soft and sweet. 6 days, Clara, and then you're mine forever." "I was already yours," she murmured against his lips. "From the moment you rode back for me." The final days before the wedding passed in a blur of activity. There were fittings for the dress, white cotton transformed by Sarah Henderson's skilled hands into something almost elegant. There were flowers to arrange, food to prepare, guests to invite. The whole town seemed caught up in the excitement, this frontier community coming together to celebrate one of their own. Clara moved through it all in a kind of daze, barely believing this was her life. She kept catching glimpses of herself in windows and mirrors, this sun-browned woman with calloused hands and a quick smile, and wondering who she was. Not Clara Wynne, certainly. That woman had died in the desert, not whoever Thomas had tried to make her into either. Someone new, someone stronger, someone who had finally found where she belonged. The night before the wedding, Cole came to Mrs. Henderson's for dinner. They sat on the porch afterward, as they had so many times before, watching the stars wheel overhead and talking about everything and nothing. "Nervous?" Cole asked. "Terrified," Clara admitted. "About marrying me." "About being happy." She turned to face him, tucking her legs beneath her. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong, for someone to show up and tell me this was all a dream, that I'm still lying in the desert, that none of it was real." "It's real." Cole took her hand, pressing it against his chest so she could feel his heartbeat. "I'm real. This is real. And tomorrow, we're going to stand in front of everyone we know and promise to spend the rest of our lives together. That's as real as it gets." I know it is, but..." Clara struggled to find the words. "I've lost so much, Cole. Everyone I've ever loved has either died or left me, My parents, my brothers, Thomas, in his own horrible way. What if that's just who I am? What if I'm the kind of person that people leave? You're not. How can you be so sure? Because I know what it's like to be left. Cole's voice was quiet, heavy with old pain. I told you once that I understood, that I'd been where you are. I never told you the details. Clara waited, sensing that he needed to tell this story in his own time. I was 16 when my father walked out, Cole said finally. Just packed up one morning and left. No note, no explanation, no goodbye. My mother never recovered. She died 2 years later, I think from a broken heart as much as anything else. And I spent years after that wondering what I'd done wrong, what was so terrible about me that my own father couldn't stand to stay. Cole, let me finish. He squeezed her hand. I joined the army because I didn't know what else to do. Spent years moving from place to place, never staying anywhere long, never letting anyone get close. I told myself I was protecting them, that if I didn't stick around, I couldn't hurt anyone the way my father hurt us. But really, I was protecting myself. I was so afraid of being left again that I made sure to leave first. What changed? You. Cole's eyes met hers, and there was such raw honesty in them that Clara felt her breath catch. When I found you in the desert, something broke open inside me. All those walls I'd built, all those years of keeping people at arm's length, none of it mattered anymore. Because you were dying, and I couldn't let you die, and I didn't even understand why. I just knew that if I rode past you, if I left you there the way everyone else had left you, I would never forgive myself. So you saved me. We saved each other. Cole raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles. You showed me that staying isn't the same as getting hurt, that loving someone isn't weakness. It's the bravest thing any of us can do. And I know you're scared, Clara. I know you're waiting for the other shoe to drop, but I swear to you, on everything I am and everything I hope to be, I will never leave you. Never. No matter what happens, no matter how hard it gets. You are my home now, and I don't leave home. Tears were streaming down Clara's face, happy tears, healing tears. She didn't try to stop them. I love you, she said. I love you so much, it terrifies me. Good. Cole smiled, wiping her cheeks with his thumbs. That means it's real. They sat together until the stars began to fade, until the first hint of dawn touched the eastern horizon. Then Cole kissed her one last time, long and slow, and full of promise, and walked away. The next time she saw him, she would be walking down the aisle. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, with a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Clara stood in her room at Mrs. Henderson's, dressed in white, the locket around her neck and the turquoise ring on her finger. Mrs. Henderson fussed with her veil, adjusting it this way and that until it lay perfectly against her hair. Sarah Henderson stood nearby with Clara's bouquet, wildflowers from the desert, beautiful in their stubborn resilience. You look like an angel, Mrs. Henderson said, stepping back to admire her work. Cole Madron is the luckiest man in the territory. In the country, Sarah corrected. In the world, Clara added, and they all laughed. There was a knock at the door. Clara's heart leaped. Was it time already? But when Mrs. Henderson opened the door, it wasn't the messenger she expected. It was Mr. Wilson, dressed in his Sunday best, looking uncomfortable and oddly emotional. Mrs. Henderson said you might need someone to walk you down the aisle, he said gruffly. I know I'm not family, but I thought, if you wanted, Clara felt fresh tears threatening. I would be honored. And so it was Mr. Wilson, cranky, penny-pinching, secretly soft-hearted Mr. Wilson, who offered his arm as Clara stepped onto the porch. The whole town seemed to have gathered in the street, forming a corridor that led to the little church where Cole was waiting. They walked slowly, savoring each step. Clara saw faces she recognized, miners who had come into the store, women who had helped with the wedding preparations, children she had taught to read in her spare time. They smiled and waved and called out blessings, this community that had taken her in and made her one of their own. And at the end of the corridor, standing at the church door, was Cole. He was dressed in a new suit that looked slightly too tight across his broad shoulders. His hair was combed back, his jaw freshly shaved. But it was his expression that made Clara's heart stop. Such love, such joy, such complete and utter devotion that she almost couldn't bear to look at him. Almost. Mr. Wilson delivered her to Cole's side with a gruff, "Take care of her, Madron," and stepped back. Cole took her hands, and Clara felt the last of her fear dissolve like morning mist. This was real. This was right. This was exactly where she was supposed to be. The ceremony was simple. They had wanted it that way. The pastor spoke of love and commitment, of promises made and promises kept. Cole's voice was steady as he recited his vows, but Clara could feel his hands trembling in hers. Her own voice shook as she spoke the words that would bind her to him forever. And when the pastor finally said, "You may kiss the bride," Cole gathered her into his arms and kissed her like she was the only woman in the world. The crowd erupted in cheers, someone fired a gun into the air, and Clara laughed against Cole's lips, laughed with pure, uncomplicated joy. She was married, she was loved, she was home. The celebration lasted well into the night. There was food and music and dancing, stories and toasts, and more happiness than Clara had experienced in her entire life combined. She danced with Cole until her feet ached, then danced with him some more. She ate cake that Mrs. Henderson had somehow conjured out of nothing. She hugged every person who came to congratulate her until her arms were sore and her cheeks hurt from smiling. And through it all, Cole stayed by her side. Her husband, her partner, her anchor. When the last guests had finally stumbled home and the stars were wheeling toward dawn, Cole led Clara out of the church and into the quiet street. "Are you happy?" he asked. "Happier than I've ever been." "Then my work here is done." He swept her up into his arms, making her shriek with surprised laughter. "Come on, Mrs. Madron. It's time to start our life." He carried her through the streets of Kingman, past the general store and the saloon and Mrs. Henderson's boarding house. He carried her out to the edge of town, where the desert stretched endlessly under a canopy of stars. And as the first light of their first morning, as husband and wife touched the eastern horizon, Clara looked at the man who had ridden back for her, who had refused to leave her behind, who had taught her what it meant to be truly loved. "Cole? Thank you for finding me." He kissed her forehead, soft and reverent. "Thank you for letting yourself be found." And together they walked into the dawn, into the life they would build, into the future that had almost been stolen from them, but was now, finally, gloriously theirs. The winter that followed their wedding was the harshest Kingman had seen in a decade. Snow fell in thick blankets across the desert, transforming the familiar landscape into something alien and beautiful. The mountains disappeared behind curtains of white, and the wind howled through the streets like a living thing, rattling windows and testing the strength of every structure in town. But inside the small cabin Cole had built on their land north of town, Clara had never felt warmer. They had moved in 3 days after the wedding, carrying their few possessions through the snow on a horseback. The cabin was modest, 2 rooms, a stone fireplace, windows that let in the winter light. But to Clara, it might as well have been a palace. Every board had been placed by Cole's hands. Every nail had been driven with thoughts of her. It was rough and imperfect and absolutely beautiful. "It's not much," Cole had said, watching her face as she walked through the door for the first time. "I know it's not what you're used to." "It's everything," Clara had interrupted, turning to face him with tears in her eyes. "It's ours. That makes it everything." Now 6 weeks into their marriage, Clara stood at the window watching the snow fall and marveling at how much her life had changed. A year ago, she had been trapped in a loveless marriage, slowly suffocating under Thomas's control. 6 months ago, she had been dying in the desert, abandoned by everyone she trusted, and now she was here, in this cabin, married to a man who looked at her like she had hung the moon. The door opened behind her, bringing a gust of cold air and the sound of stomping boots. "Storm's getting worse," Cole said, shaking snow from his coat. "I got the horses settled in the barn, but we might be stuck inside for a few days." "Is that supposed to be bad news?" He grinned, crossing the room to wrap his arms around her from behind. "Depends on how you feel about being trapped with me." "I think I can manage." They stood together at the window, watching the snow pile higher against the glass. Cole's chin rested on top of her head, his arms warm and solid around her waist. It was such a simple moment, so ordinary, so domestic, but Clara felt her heart swell with gratitude for it. "What are you thinking about?" Cole murmured. "About how strange life is." How you can go from having nothing to having everything in the space of a few months. You didn't have nothing. You had yourself. That's more than most people start with. Clara turned in his arms, looking up at his weathered face. When did you become so wise? I've always been wise. You're just finally noticing. She laughed and swatted his chest, but he caught her hand and pressed it against his heart. His expression grew serious. I have something to tell you, he said. Clara's stomach tightened. In her experience, those words rarely preceded good news. What is it? I've been offered a promotion. The commander wants me to take over as chief scout for the whole territory. It would mean more responsibility, more pay. He paused. And it would mean I'd be home even more. Desk work, mostly. Training younger scouts instead of riding out myself. Clara stared at him. Cole, that's wonderful. Why do you look so worried? Because I'm not sure I should take it. Why on earth not? Cole released her hand and walked to the fireplace, staring into the flames. Because it feels like giving up, like I'm admitting I'm too old, too slow, too domesticated for the real work. I've been a scout for 8 years, Clara. It's all I know. What if I take this job and discover I'm terrible at it? What if I can't adjust? What if you're happy? He turned to look at her, surprise flickering across his face. What? You heard me. Clara crossed the room to stand beside him. What if you take this job and discover that you love it? That training young scouts is just as fulfilling as being one yourself? That coming home to me every night is worth more than all the adventure in the world? She reached up to cup his face in her hands. You're not giving up, Cole. You're growing. There's a difference. How do you always know exactly what to say? I don't. I'm just very good at pretending. He laughed, that rare, genuine laugh she treasured, and pulled her close. What did I do to deserve you? You rode back, that's all. You rode back when everyone else rode away. They held each other as the storm raged outside, as the fire crackled and popped, as the world narrowed to the warmth of their small cabin and the steady beat of each other's hearts. I'll take the job, Cole said finally. For you, for us, for whatever comes next. Whatever comes next, Clara repeated, and smiled because she had a secret, one she had been carrying for 2 weeks now, waiting for the right moment to share. Whatever came next was going to be more wonderful than either of them could imagine. The storm lasted 3 days. When it finally broke, the world outside was transformed. A pristine blanket of white stretching as far as the eye could see, glittering in the winter sun like a field of diamonds. Clara stood on the porch of their cabin, breathing in the cold, clean air, and felt something like peace settle into her bones. Cole came up behind her, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. You'll catch your death out here. I'm fine. I'm more than fine. She leaned back against his chest, watching their breath form clouds in the frigid air. I have something to tell you. Should I be worried? I don't think so. Clara turned to face him, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and terror. I'm pregnant. The words hung in the air between them. Cole's face went through a remarkable series of expressions: shock, disbelief, confusion, and finally, slowly, a joy so profound it seemed to transform him from the inside out. Pregnant, he repeated. We're going to have a baby. Yes. Clara felt tears prickling at her eyes. I wasn't sure at first. I thought it might be the flu or something I ate, but I saw the doctor in town last week, and he confirmed it. We're going to be parents, Cole. For a long moment, Cole didn't move. Then he swept her up into his arms, spinning her around on the snow-covered porch, laughing like a man half his age. A baby, he shouted to the empty landscape. We're having a baby. Put me down before you drop me. He set her down carefully, cupping her face in his hands, looking at her with such tenderness that Clara felt her heart might burst. I love you, he said. Have I told you that today? At least 3 times. Then let me make it 4. I love you, Clara Madron. I love you more than I ever thought I could love anyone, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you and this baby know exactly how much you mean to me. Clara kissed him, soft and sweet, tasting the salt of happy tears. I love you too, more than words can say. They stood together on the porch as the sun rose higher, as the snow began to melt and drip from the eaves, as the first birds of the day began to sing. A new chapter was beginning, one neither of them had dared to hope for, but both had secretly dreamed of. A family. A real family, built on love and trust and the unshakable foundation of two people who had chosen each other against all odds. The weeks that followed were filled with preparations. Cole threw himself into finishing the cabin, adding a nursery, reinforcing the walls, making sure every inch of their home was safe and warm for the child that was coming. Clara continued working at the general store. Though Mrs. Henderson and half the women in town kept insisting she take it easy. "You're not an invalid," Clara would say, laughing off their concerns. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I think I can manage a few hours of inventory." But she was grateful for their care, even if she wouldn't admit it. This community that had adopted her, that had celebrated her wedding and mourned her sorrows and welcomed her as one of their own. They were her family now, and soon they would be her child's family too. One evening in late February, as the worst of the winter began to loosen its grip on the territory, Cole came home with a serious expression on his face. "What is it?" Clara asked, immediately worried. "Nothing bad." He sat down at their small table, gesturing for her to join him. "I've been thinking about the future, about what kind of life we want to build for our child. And I realize that I've been going about this all wrong." He reached across the table and took her hands. "When I asked you to marry me, I did it on impulse. In a boarding house bedroom, when you were barely recovered from saving those children. It wasn't the proposal you deserved. Cole, I didn't need—" "Let me finish." His grip on her hands tightened. "I wanted to do it right, to give you a memory worth keeping. So I've been planning something, a proper proposal, even though we're already married, a moment just for us." Clara felt tears threatening again. She seemed to cry at everything these days, but she blinked them back. "What kind of moment?" "Come with me." Cole stood, pulling her gently to her feet. "Trust me." He led her outside where two horses stood saddled and ready. The evening sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and deep, bruised purple. Cole helped her mount, then swung up onto his own horse. "Where are we going?" "You'll see." They rode in silence through the transformed landscape, past snow-covered rocks and stands of juniper trees heavy with white. The air was cold but not bitter, and the world seemed hushed, expectant, as if holding its breath. After about an hour, they reached a mesa Clara had never seen before, a flat stretch of rock overlooking the entire valley, with views that stretched for miles in every direction. The setting sun had turned everything to gold, and the silence was so complete that Clara could hear her own heartbeat. Cole dismounted and helped her down, then led her to the edge of the mesa. Below them, the desert spread out like a painting. The town of Kingman, a tiny cluster of buildings in the distance, the mountains rising purple against the horizon, the land that had almost killed her now transformed into something breathtaking. "This is where I come when I need to think," Cole said quietly, "when I need to remember what's important. I found it years ago before I met you, and I used to wonder if I'd ever have someone to share it with." He turned to face her, and Clara saw that his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Clara Wynne Madron," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know I already married you. I know we've already made our vows, but I want to make them again, here, in this place that means so much to me. I want to look at you with our child growing inside you and tell you that I choose you, not because I found you in the desert, not because fate threw us together, but because you are the strongest, kindest, most beautiful person I have ever known, and every single day with you is a gift I don't deserve." Clara was crying now, unable to stop the tears streaming down her face. "Let's build something together," Cole continued, taking both her hands in his. "A life, a home, a future. Not because we have to, not because there's nowhere else to go, but because there's nowhere else I'd rather be. Marry me again, Clara. Marry me 1,000 times. Marry me every day for the rest of our lives." "Yes," Clara whispered. "Yes, yes. 1,000 times, yes." Cole kissed her as the sun sank below the horizon, as the first stars began to appear, as the world faded into twilight around them. And Clara knew, with absolute certainty, that this was the moment she would remember for the rest of her life. Not the first proposal, desperate and impulsive, not even their wedding day, surrounded by well-wishers, but this, the two of them alone on a mesa overlooking the desert, making promises that no one else would ever hear. This was the beginning of forever. Spring came to Arizona like a promise finally kept. The snow melted from the mountains, sending streams rushing through canyons that had been silent all winter. Wildflowers erupted across the desert floor in waves of yellow and purple and red, and the air filled with the songs of birds returning from their southern wanderings. It was as if the land itself was waking from a long sleep, stretching toward the sun with the same hope that filled Clara's heart. Her belly had grown round now, visible even beneath the loose dresses Mrs. Henderson had helped her sew. The baby moved constantly, kicking and turning, reminding Clara with every flutter that she was no longer alone in her body. She would lie awake at night with Cole's hand pressed against her stomach, both of them waiting for those small movements, laughing with wonder each time they came. "He's going to be a fighter," Cole said one evening as they sat together on their porch watching the sunset. "Feel how strong those kicks are." "She," Clara corrected, "and she gets it from her mother. You think it's a girl?" "I know it's a girl." Clara smiled, rubbing the spot where the baby had just landed a particularly vigorous blow. "I dreamed about her last night. She had your eyes and my stubbornness. God help us all." They laughed together, and Clara marveled at how easy it had become. This life, this love, this simple happiness that once seemed impossibly out of reach. The cabin was nearly finished now, expanded to include the nursery Cole had promised, with windows that looked out over the valley and a small fireplace to keep the winter chill at bay. The land around them was being transformed too, fences going up for the horses Cole was breeding, a vegetable garden taking shape behind the house, the foundations of something permanent being laid one day at a time. Clara's work at the general store had slowed as her pregnancy progressed, though she still went in a few mornings a week to help with the books. Mr. Wilson had hired a young man to handle the heavy lifting, but he insisted that Clara's head for numbers was irreplaceable. "You'll come back after the baby's born," he said gruffly, in a tone that brooked no argument. "Part-time, whenever you can manage. I'm not losing my best employee to motherhood." "I wouldn't dream of abandoning you," Clara had replied, and meant it. The store had been her lifeline when she first arrived in Kingman, a place to feel useful, to rebuild her sense of purpose. She wasn't ready to give that up entirely, but her focus now was on the life growing inside her. Every kick, every movement, every quiet moment with her hand pressed to her belly reminded her of how far she had come. A year ago, she had been dying in the desert, abandoned by everyone she trusted. Now she was building a family, surrounded by people who loved her, preparing to bring a new life into the world. The irony wasn't lost on her. Thomas had left her for dead because she was inconvenient, a sick wife who threatened to slow down his plans. And now, from the ashes of that betrayal, something beautiful was growing. Something Thomas could never have given her, because Thomas had never been capable of real love. Cole was different. Cole loved her in a way that felt almost sacred, not because she was useful to him, not because she fit into his plans, but simply because she existed. He loved her strength and her weakness, her laughter and her tears, her hopes and her fears. He loved the woman she was becoming, not just the woman she had been. And soon, they would have a child to love together. The baby came on a warm May evening, as the sun was setting over the mountains and painting the sky in shades of fire. Clara had been feeling strange all day, restless, uncomfortable, unable to settle. She had walked around the cabin a dozen times, rearranged the nursery twice, and finally admitted to Cole that something was happening. "It's time," she said, gripping the edge of the kitchen table as a wave of pain rolled through her. "Cole, it's time." The next few hours were a blur of agony and determination. Mrs. Henderson came, summoned by Cole's frantic ride into town, along with the doctor and Sarah Henderson and half the women of Kingman, or so it seemed. They filled the cabin with their bustling presence, boiling water and preparing linens and murmuring encouragement. Clara barely noticed any of it. The pain was all-consuming, wave after wave crashing over her, and she clung to Cole's hand like a lifeline. He stayed by her side through every contraction, his face pale but his voice steady, telling her she was strong, she was brave, she could do this. "I can't," Clara gasped at one point, tears streaming down her face. "Cole, I can't." "You can." His hands gripped hers, warm and solid. "You walked 20 miles through the desert on nothing but willpower. You survived things that would have broken anyone else. This is nothing, Clara. This is just the beginning." And somehow, impossibly, she believed him. The baby came just as the last light faded from the sky. A girl, just as Clara had dreamed, with a thatch of dark hair and lungs powerful enough to wake the dead. The doctor placed her on Clara's chest, and the whole world narrowed to that small, perfect weight. "Hello," Clara whispered, tears flowing freely now. "Hello, little one. We've been waiting for you." Cole leaned over them both, his own eyes suspiciously bright. He touched the baby's tiny hand, marveling at the miniature fingers that curled instinctively around his own. "She's perfect," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Clara, she's absolutely perfect." "She is." Clara looked up at her husband, at this man who had saved her life and then given her a new one. What should we call her? They had discussed names for months, going back and forth, never quite settling on anything that felt right. But now, looking at this tiny creature who had fought her way into the world, Clara knew her knew. "Hope," she said. "Her name is Hope." Cole nodded slowly, understanding the weight of the word. Hope. What Clara had clung to in the desert, what had carried her through the darkest days, what had led her to this moment. "Hope Madron," he said, testing the sound of it. "It's perfect." The baby, Hope, chose that moment to yawn, her tiny mouth opening wide before settling into a contented sigh. Clara laughed, the sound breaking through her exhaustion. "I think she approves." The weeks that followed were a haze of sleepless nights and overwhelming love. Hope was a demanding baby, hungry every few hours, fussy when she was tired, prone to crying for reasons neither Clara nor Cole could decipher. But she was also beautiful beyond words. Her eyes, when they finally settled into their permanent color, were whiskey brown like her father's, and her temperament, despite the crying, showed flashes of the stubbornness Clara had predicted. Clara took to motherhood with the same determination she had brought to everything else in her life. She learned to nurse while walking, to change diapers in the dark, to catch sleep in small snatches whenever Hope would allow it. She learned the particular sound of Hope's hungry cry versus her tired cry, the way she liked to be rocked, the songs that would calm her when nothing else would. And through it all, Cole was there. He took the night feedings when Clara was too exhausted to move. He changed diapers without complaint, held Hope for hours when she was colicky, sang off-key lullabies that made Clara laugh even through her exhaustion. He was the father she had always dreamed of for her children, present, devoted, endlessly patient. "You're good at this," Clara told him one morning, watching him walk Hope around the cabin, the baby finally settling after a difficult night. "I'm making it up as I go." "So am I, but at least we're making it up together." Cole smiled, that rare, genuine smile that still made her heart skip. "Together." I like the sound of that. Summer arrived in full force, bringing heat that shimmered off the desert floor and turned the afternoons into tests of endurance. Clara and Hope spent most of those hot hours inside, in the relative cool of the cabin, while Cole worked on the ranch in the early morning and late evening. Their little homestead was thriving. The horses Cole was breeding had attracted buyers from as far away as California, and the vegetable garden was producing more than they could eat. They had hired a young man from town to help with the heavier work, and Sarah Henderson's husband James had become a regular presence, helping Cole with projects too large for one person. It was, Clara realized one evening, exactly the life she had dreamed of during those dark days in the desert. A home, a family, a community, a future. And yet something still nagged at her, a shadow that lingered at the edges of her happiness, refusing to fully disappear. She was sitting on the porch one evening, nursing Hope as the sun went down, when Cole came to join her. He had been working in the barn all afternoon and he smelled of hay and horses and honest sweat. "You're brooding," he said, settling into the chair beside her. "I'm not brooding, I'm thinking." "Same thing, with you." He reached over to stroke Hope's downy head. "What are you thinking about?" Clara was quiet for a long moment, trying to find the words. Do you remember what you said to me that first day in the desert, when you found me? I said a lot of things. You said you don't leave people behind, not ever. Clara shifted Hope to her other breast, careful not to disturb the baby's feeding. I've been thinking about that, about what it means. And I realized that I spent my whole life being left behind. My parents died, my brothers died. Thomas abandoned me. I thought that was just who I was, the person people leave. She looked at Cole, at his weathered face and his kind eyes and the strength that radiated from every part of him. But you changed that. You rode back for me when everyone else rode away, and I've been trying to figure out why. I told you why. I don't leave. I know what you told me, but I want to know the deeper reason. What made you that way? What made you the kind of man who rides back? Cole was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with old pain. My mother, he said finally. When my father left, it broke her. Not all at once. It was slow, like watching someone drown in inches. She stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped caring about anything. And I watched her fade away, day by day, knowing there was nothing I could do to bring her back. Cole, let me finish. He took a breath. When she died, I made myself a promise. I swore that I would never be like him, never abandon someone who needed me, never ride away when riding back was possible. He reached over and took Clara's free hand. And then I found you in the desert, more dead than alive, and I understood why I'd made that promise. It wasn't just about not being my father. It was about being ready, being worthy, when the moment came, when someone needed me to ride back. Clara felt tears slipping down her cheeks. I'm glad you were ready. So am I. Cole lifted her hand to his lips. So am I. They sat together as the stars came out, as Hope finished nursing and fell asleep against Clara's chest, as the desert cooled and the night wrapped around them like a blessing. And Clara understood finally that she would never be left behind again. Not because the world had changed, but because she had found someone who would always, always come back for her. The fall brought changes none of them had anticipated. Mrs. Henderson, who had seemed as permanent as the mountains themselves, announced that she was retiring. Her nephew had come from back east to take over the boarding house, and she was moving to California to live with her sister. I'm not as young as I used to be, she told Clara, as they sat together in her parlor for what might be the last time. And this old body needs a gentler climate. I'll miss you, Clara said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. This woman had been mother and mentor and friend, had nursed her back to health and watched her fall in love, had celebrated every triumph and comforted every sorrow. I'll miss you too, child, but you don't need me anymore. Mrs. Henderson reached out and patted her hand. You have your husband, your daughter, your home. You have everything you need to build a beautiful life. I couldn't have done any of it without you. Nonsense. You would have found your way regardless. I just helped smooth the path a little. The older woman's eyes grew misty. I want you to know something, Clara. When Cole first brought you to my door, half dead and barely breathing, I wasn't sure you'd make it through the night, but there was something in your eyes, a spark, a determination that told me you weren't ready to give up. And I was right. You're the strongest person I've ever known. Clara embraced her, holding tight to this woman who had been her anchor in the storm. Thank you for everything. Take care of that family of yours, and tell that husband of yours that if he ever makes you unhappy, I'll come back from California just to set him straight. I'll tell him. Mrs. Henderson left on a Tuesday morning, waving from the stagecoach window until she disappeared around a bend in the road. Clara stood in the street with Hope in her arms, watching until there was nothing left to see. It felt like the end of an era, but also, somehow, like the beginning of something new. The first anniversary of Clara's rescue came and went without fanfare. She marked it quietly, walking out to the edge of their property at dawn to watch the sun rise over the desert that had almost claimed her life. So much had changed in a year. She was a wife now, a mother, a member of a community that had embraced her as one of their own. She had a home, a purpose, a future bright with possibility. The woman who had woken up in the desert, abandoned and dying, seemed like a stranger now, someone from another lifetime, another world. But Clara didn't want to forget her. That woman, desperate, terrified, clinging to life with nothing but stubbornness and will. She was the foundation on which everything else had been built. Without her, without that moment of choosing to live when dying would have been easier, none of this would exist. Thank you, Clara whispered to the desert, to the sky, to whatever force had kept her alive long enough for Cole to find her. Thank you for not letting me give up. The wind stirred the dust at her feet, carrying the scent of sage and creosote. In the distance, a hawk circled lazily, riding the thermals with effortless grace. The desert didn't answer. It never did. But Clara felt heard nonetheless. She turned and walked back toward the cabin, toward the life she had built, toward the family waiting for her inside. Cole was on the porch when she arrived, Hope balanced on his hip, both of them watching her approach with identical expressions of curious welcome. "Where did you go?" Cole asked. "Just needed some air." Clara climbed the porch steps and took Hope from his arms, pressing a kiss to her daughter's soft cheek. "And some perspective." "Find what you were looking for?" Clara looked at him, this man who had ridden back for her, who had taught her what it meant to be loved, who had given her a family and a future and a reason to hope. She looked at their daughter, this perfect little person who represented everything good that had come from the worst moment of her life. She looked at the cabin behind them, solid and warm, built with their own hands on land that belonged to them. "I found everything," she said. "I found everything I ever needed." Cole smiled, pulling her close, wrapping his arms around both her and Hope. They stood together on the porch of their home, watching the morning sun climb higher, listening to the sounds of their land waking up around them. "You know what I realized?" Cole said quietly. "That day in the desert, when I found you, I thought I was saving your life. Turns out, I was finding mine." Clara leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart, the warmth of his body, the unshakable solidity of his presence. "We found each other," she said, "and that's the only thing that matters." Hope gurgled contentedly, reaching up to grab at Cole's chin with her tiny fingers. They both laughed, the sound carrying across the desert, mixing with the bird song and the wind and the endless rhythm of life continuing. The woman once left behind had become the heart of a thriving home. The scout who had vowed never to abandon anyone kept that promise every single day. And their family's story, rooted in courage, rescue, and chosen love, would be told for generations to come. It had begun in the desert, in the worst moment of Clara's life, in the space between death and survival. It had grown through hardship and healing, through trust slowly rebuilt and love carefully tended. And now it flourished, strong and beautiful, a testament to what was possible when two broken people chose to mend each other. Clara Wynne had been left for dead in the Arizona desert. Clara Madron had risen from those ashes to build a life beyond her wildest dreams, and neither she nor Cole nor their daughter Hope would ever be left behind again. The story was complete. The wounds were healed. The future stretched before them, bright and full of promise. And they walked into it together, hand in hand, heart to heart, forever home at last.